Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Eastern Area Planning. I'm Graham Pass, Chairman of Committee. Other members of the committee present are Councillors Graham Bridgman, Jeremy Cottam, Alan Law, Tony Linden, Alan Macro, Jeff Mays, Richard Somner and Keith Woodhams. We have the following officers in attendance to advise and support the meeting. Bob Dray, our team leader in development control. Michael Butler, Principal Planning Officer, who will be presenting an item. Matthew Shepherd, a Senior Planning Officer, who has the joy of 2 items this evening. Brian Little, our Planning Policy Manager, in case there are any policy questions that arise. John Bowden, our Senior Engineer for Drainage and Flood Risk Management, again for questions that may arise for such issues. Gareth Dowding, Principal Engineer, Traffic and Road Safety. Ditto. Kim Marr, Legal Services to keep us on the straight and narrow. Jess Bayliss, Democratic Services, who will be taking the minutes. And last but by no means least, Tom Dunn, our Zoom host. So before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present and in the meeting room. Although there are no longer formal restrictions regarding COVID, the council is continuing to adhere to safe working arrangements, including the recommendation that individuals continue to wear a mask when not seated. And colleagues are also asked to continue to use the cleaning materials provided to clean the desk, as this will help minimise the risk. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Please may I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure they switch their microphones on when invited to speak and speak clearly, quite closely into them, and to switch them off when finished. Can I also ask to make sure you put your mobile phones to silent and have the volume turned off on your tablets. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by the trained officers present. Please follow any instructions given by the officers. The assembly point is the Newbury Station multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance down the stairs will be assisted accordingly by our officers. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we'll remain seated and await instructions from officers and will adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? I see no hands. As always, members, when it comes to debate and asking questions, if you could raise your Zoom hand. And just for the benefit of those members of the public and parish and town councillors who have joined us, and indeed district councillors, when you are invited to speak, please go to the dais and speak into the microphone. You will have up to 5 minutes per group, but please remain in position after you've spoken because members could ask you questions on anything you have raised. So first of all, apologies. Do we have any apologies for absence, please, Jess?
Yes, Chairman. So I've received apologies from Councillor Ross McKinnon with Councillor Graham Bridgman substituting.
Thank you very much. Item 2, minutes of 2 meetings, the 9th and the 30th of March. Members, sure you've had time to read them. May I sign them as a true and correct record? Councillor Mays.
Yeah. On page 5, paragraph 2, I'm a member of BBOWT, B-B-O-W-T.
You are indeed. Right, thank you.
That's all as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. With that minor amendment, may I? Yeah. Thank you. Give me a second. Oh, is there a proposer? Yeah. Councillor Law and seconded by Councillor Linden. Right. Thank you, Ms. Marr.
Chairman, if I just may, I wasn't present at the first meeting, so I can only propose the second.
Oh, I have a proposal for the first one, please.
Chairman, actually, I've been advised by the monitoring officer that you can propose anything you like and you can second anything you like as long as you're in the meeting. But I was at the meeting and I'm very happy to propose.
All right, okay. Ms. Marr, have you got that? Mr. Marr, sorry. Well, show of hands, please. All that are happy. Thank you very much indeed. Yes. Members, declarations of interest. I'm going to claim chairman's privilege and say that I do have some declarations of interest. First of all, there are 2 items in Midgham, and of course, being ward member, I do know a considerable number of people, both there and in Wolverhampton, and I have been canvassed on some of these. I'm going to quote Councillor Bridgman. I am predisposed towards 2 items in Midgham. I am not predetermined. I clearly have to indicate my support for the residents who have contacted me, and I therefore have asked at the appropriate time before we start debating or listening to the having the presentation for the first item. Councillor Anna Macro, the Vice Chairman, has kindly agreed to sit in this chair and chair the meeting. Are there any other declarations of interest? Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I suspect most members know the 2 representatives of Thatcham Town Council on the second application tonight.
Yeah, I was going to come to that. There are 2 district councillors who are members of the town council, indeed, of whom we all know. I think we can take that as a blanket. And actually, what I haven't mentioned yet is on the 3rd application. I used to be ward member in Bradfield and know the 2 people who are speaking in that capacity, but that's a personal, not a prejudicial interest. Are there any others? I'm looking around, looking at Zoom hands, I'm looking for physical hands. In that case, before we turn to the first item, which is land at the junction with Bath Road, New Road Hill, Midgham, I will vacate this seat and ask Councillor Macro to come over to this position.
Thank you, Graham. Could I ask the planning officer to introduce the first item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Matthew Shepherd. I'm the Senior Planning Officer who dealt with this application. The first application on the agenda tonight is land at junction with Bath Road and New Road Hill, Midgham. Application 20/03028 out major. The application proposes is an outline application for the erection of 16 dwellings, including 6 affordable units with access from Bath Road. Matters to be considered are access alone. It comes before committee tonight due to having more than 10 letters of objection, and the officer's recommendation is for approval subject to conditions and a section 106 agreement. The application seeks outline permission for the erection of 16 dwellings within the red line seen on the screen here. Matters to be discussed tonight are access only at this outline stage, but layout, scale, appearance and landscaping are all reserved matters for later consideration if outline permission is granted. I'll move to the indicative site layout just to give you a bit more context in terms of colour. The site is located at the junction of Bath Road and New Road Hill on the western edge of Wolverhampton within the parish of Midgham. The site is not within a planning policy defined settlement boundary. The site is 0.81 hectares in size. It is undeveloped greenfield site currently used as a paddock with strongly defined boundaries adjacent to an ancient woodland you can see to the left of the screen. The site is bounded to the west by a biodiversity opportunity area, a local wildlife site, has a tree protection order in the bottom right and the east of the site, bottom right of the image, the T1 oak. The site is bounded by ancient woodland to the east. Just running through, so this is the indicative layout that's been submitted to the council, again, to display how an application may come forward at reserve matters for the development to be constructed. You can see here the access to the Bath Road. You can see the copse to the west of the site and the strong boundary treatments. To the north is an area of green open space, which is the oil pipeline which runs through the site. There's an easement, which means no development can be situated either side of that pipeline. To the west of the site, there is a buffer to the ancient woodland as well. As we saw on the site visit last week, the site has a slope to it, so indicative site levels have been submitted to show how the relief of the site can be accommodated within the proposed development. So 2 images there for plot 1s to 1, 2 and 4. Moving to the matter considered on outline, which is access. This slide shows you the access to the A4 and the visibility displays displayed on the site. Again, another image here taken from the transport statement displays the arrangements for accessing the site off of the A4. These are included within my presentation for future reference as well for questions of officers. Moving to the indicative layout, it has been submitted with this application a swept path analysis for collection of waste into the site to display how the site can accommodate this factor, as well as swept path analysis for fire tenders into the site. Again, I'll stress that the layout is indicative, but this obviously displays how these items and issues can be accommodated into the development. Next slide shows the indicative surface water drainage strategy for the site included within the drainage and flood risk assessments. Again, showing how the indicative layout can accommodate an effective SUD solution. Moving to a bit more of a detail for the drainage strategy, showing wetland features within the development, something that we can push for through planning conditions, but also that's been considered from the outset. Run through some images that we've taken of the site. So this is taken from the corner of the site where we had our site meeting last week, showing the relationship up the site and towards the neighbouring property to the north. You see the relief of the site and the slope. This image shows the adjacent dwelling, but also shows the strong boundary treatments that are thought to be retained on the site. This shows the southern section of the site, again displaying in the far distance of the photo the adjacent woodland, but also the strong boundary treatments. Coming out of the site, we see the junction of New Road Hill, which shows the A4 to the left of the image and the proposed site in the centre of the image behind the parked cars. Again, moving just to an image to the right of that to show you the relationship to New Road Hill and the strong boundary treatments. That tree in the centre of the image is the TPO tree, which is being retained. This is an image of the A4 looking west with a footpath present. The access will be approximately where that central lamppost is. Again, this is taken from the opposite side of the A4 to just show the boundary treatments and the New Road Hill junction. Moving further back, this is an image of the proposed access. Again, that central lamppost is a good indicator of where the access will be. The access shown in that image is the one to the parish parking in the parish hall. I'm going to leave the indicative site layers on the screen and run through the planning considerations within the report. So it should be noted that this application was submitted previously and refused by the council in January 2020. That decision, it was substantially a similar application to this one considered tonight. The decision was refused. The decision was then appealed by and went to the planning inspectorate. During the course of the appeal, the Regulation 18 consultation draft of the local plan review came out. This application was within that Regulation 18, and consequently, the appeal was withdrawn to pursue this application. In terms of the consultations, both parish councils, Midgham Parish Council and Wolverhampton Parish Council, have objected, as outlined within the report on page 27. Our highways officers have raised no objections. Tree officers have raised no objections. Our housing officers have raised no objections, subject to securing affordable housing via legal agreement. Our ecology officers have raised no objection. Our planning policy officers have made their comments, which I'll cover during the principle of development section of the report. Thames Water Utilities have raised no objections, subject to two conditions that are included within the report, which I'll come to later on. There's no objections from an emergency planning officer. No objections from the environmental health officers of West Berkshire Council, no objections from the Environment Agency or the lead local flood authority, and very importantly, no objections from the owners of the pipeline running to the north of the site. The application has received 39 contributors, all of which are objections. I've summarised the objections within the report, but I'll run through some of the most pertinent points in terms of the Wolverhampton not requiring any further housing, the junction being dangerous for the A4, the degree and extra traffic being a major disruption to the local area, the destroying of the character of the area. The paddock forms defined rural landscape on the approach to the village. The site is greenfield. There will be the development will impede natural drainage of the site. The sewage works in the local vicinity are inadequate. The site has been rejected previously. There's also, as I referred to, the update sheet, an e-petition was submitted to the council. At the time of writing the update sheet, 60 people have signed that. Again, this is summarised within the update sheet that there are concerns with sewage drainage capacity, oversubscription of schools, the placement of the ghost island in the A4, parking on New Road Hill being insufficient, and the impact from the development on the landscape, and continued submission of applications. Moving to the considerations for planning policy and the principle of development. According to Plan Policy ADPP1, most development will be within or adjacent to settlement boundaries in the hierarchy. Only appropriate limited development will be allowed outside of defined settlement boundaries. Again, Policy CS1 directs development to be located primarily on suitable land within settlement boundaries. Policy C1 lists exceptions where housing is allowed outside of settlement boundaries. The proposed development does not meet the exceptions listed in Policy C1, and therefore there's a policy presumption against new residential development applies in this instance. The proposed development is considered to be contrary to the current development plan. Moving forwards, however, the local plan is being reviewed under the West Berkshire Local Plan Review to 2037. The application site has been promoted again as part of this local plan review. Of the three sites adjacent to the village of Wolverhampton, this is the only site that has not been discounted through this process and is the only proposed allocation in the village. Planning policy have confirmed that the masses raised within the Regulation 18 are not significant to warrant not pursuing the allocation, and therefore it's considered that there are not any unresolved technical objections to this site moving forward into the local plan review. Taking all these points into consideration, is considered the application site is highly likely to progress as an allocation in the local plan review, and therefore greater weight can be applied to the emerging policies in accordance with paragraph 48 of the NPPF. It should be considered whether the development, whether planning permission now would be premature to the adoption of the local plan. In point 6.29, we have listed the NPPF is recreated there to display the issues of prematurity. The NPPF provides in paragraph 50 that prematurity will seldom be justified where a draft plan has yet to be submitted for examination. Where planning permission is refused, grounds of prematurity will need to be indicated clearly how granting permission for the development concerned would prejudice the outcome of the plan making process. As such, officers do not believe that the application warrants refusal on prematurity. Overall, the principle of development is considered in this particular circumstances of this case that the principle of development is acceptable. Moving on to other issues within the report, the density of the houses proposed is considered acceptable. There is a policy compliant level of affordable housing with starter homes. These are pepper potted around the site and are of various sizes. Consultation has taken place with our housing officers to ensure that units are of an appropriate size and appropriately spread across the site. In terms of landscape and visual impacts of the development, the proposed development would have an adverse impact in terms of loss of open paddock, which makes a contribution to the rural setting of the village. The presence of housing would be conspicuous in public views immediately adjacent to the site. Whilst it is considered that there is landscape and visual harm, it is to be localised to the immediate vicinity of the site, whereby the development would be viewed in the context of existing built form, and views of the development would be filtered by the substantial boundary treatments. Overall, it is considered that there would be some localised harm, that when balanced against the principle of development, it is considered the site is acceptable in this respect. The indicative layout has been looked at in terms of neighbouring amenity and is not considered to give rise to issues of overlooking, overbearing, overshadowing, or loss of sunlight. Of course, this is an indicative layout, so subject to change at reserve matters if the application gets to that stage. The indicative layout also shows sufficient amenity space for future gardens for future occupants. Our high-res officers have raised no objections. Our high-res officer is here tonight, so I don't propose to go through all the points within the report, but obviously there's no objections to the traffic generated, and the visibility space that they access are considered acceptable to those officers. In terms of flooding and sustainable drainage, the site is located in flood zone 1, which indicates a low risk of flooding. The site relief and aspects and characteristics of the site mean that flooding and sustainable drainage are important aspects to be considered, and therefore a substantial condition has been recommended. That condition, I'll draw your attention to the update sheet, has been updated from the report. The changes are that the details come in at the same time as the reserve matters, so any layout and changes at reserve matters all contribute and all have flooding and sustainable drainage as principles within the layout. Moving to sustainable construction energy efficiency. In accordance with CS15, the applicant has submitted an energy statement which summarises a total reduction in emissions from energy efficiency, low carbon and renewable technologies to 57.9%. Whilst not achieving full zero carbon, this is considered to be a meaningful reduction in carbon emissions and reflective of the site's constraints. Our tree officers and ecology officers have raised no objections to the application subject to conditions. In conclusion, the planning balance and conclusion of the development, the proposed development engages the presumption against new residential development in policy C1 of the HSA DPT, and therefore not in accordance with the current development plan. However, the site is proposed as a housing site allocation in the draft local plan review. Careful consideration has been given to specific merits of this case in accordance with paragraph 48 of the NPPF, which allows planning authorities to give weight to policies in emerging plans. Whilst the local plan review is relatively early stages of preparation, the specific circumstances relating to Wolverhampton and the proposed eastern spatial area, as covered within the report, are such that it is considered that the application site is highly likely to progress as an allocation in the local plan review, and therefore greater weight can be applied to emerging planning policies in accordance with paragraph 48. The proposed development will give rise to some localized harm and visual harm to the immediate vicinity. However, it is considered this harm is outweighed by the benefit of the housing in this location. All other technical considerations are considered to be acceptable. Balancing all considerations in this application, it's concluded the benefits of the proposal outweigh the adverse effects, and therefore the application is recommended for approval subject to Section 106 agreement and the conditions set out in the report, the conditions set out within the update sheet, and a verbally added condition for prior approval of a sustainability and energy statement to secure the agreed carbon reductions. I'll run through just quickly the conditions just to highlight some of the most important ones in terms of responding to issues and objections raised, but the standard approval plans, the time limits for reserved matters, approved documents, construction method statements, hours of work to protect amenity of existing residents. Details should be submitted about the protection from external noise for future residents of the development. There should be protection of trees on site during construction. There is a plethora of arboricultural conditions to ensure that the existing boundary treatments and ancient woodland are all protected during construction. Highways officers have recommended electric vehicle charging points be submitted, parking prior to first occupation be submitted. Details covering sustainable drainage, again updated. Condition 23 requires the lighting strategy submitted, a concern for some residents at the site meeting. Site levels, again, the relief of the site was seen as an important aspect, so that needs to be double checked prior to development beginning. Biodiversity enhancement through kind of conditions 29, 30 and 31. And then two very important conditions, condition number 33 and 34, which are recommended in accordance with Thames Water's consultation in terms of ensuring that foul water drainage capacity exists to accommodate the site, as well as water network capacity exists to accommodate the site. Again, prior approval for those two items. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. I believe that we have a representative from Midgham Parish Council in the room. Would they come forward, please? You have 5 minutes. Would you like a warning when any particular time?
No, it won't be necessary. Thank you. As the planning officer mentioned, the outline application for the erection of 16 dwellings on this site was refused on the 23rd of January 2020. The proposed application was considered to be contrary to the current development plan and deemed not appropriate development in the countryside. Midgham Parish Council objected to the original application, and we see no reason to alter our decision for this resurrected and identical application. We object on the following grounds. It is a development in the countryside. It is outside the settlement boundary. It is an unfortunate example of unwanted creeping urbanisation. And furthermore, Midgham Parish Council objects to the potential inclusion of this site as a residential allocation in the proposed West Berkshire local plan review to 2037. This 2-acre greenfield site is outside any defined settlement boundary and lies adjacent to ancient woodland. The site is currently used as a paddock with hedgerows and a number of trees. And there's a tree preservation order on an old oak on the east side. The southeast corner of the site is of special interest with regard to ecological diversity. A significant section of this southern area will be destroyed by the new access to the proposed development site. We are concerned that the erection of 16 dwellings will have a detrimental effect upon the ancient woodland on the west and east boundaries, and which form part of the East Kennet Valley Biodiversity Opportunity Area. We are mindful that the core strategy requires biodiversity assets, such as this site, to be conserved. The site is also approximately 500 metres from the Woolhampton reed beds and the River Kennet site of special scientific interest, with protected species present. The residents of Midgham and Woolhampton are no strangers to the risk and consequences of flooding. There is therefore a concern that the development of this site will reduce natural infiltration and result in a higher risk of flooding to existing properties. We are not reassured by the comments raised by Thames Water Utilities in the report. They have been unable to determine the wastewater infrastructure needs of this application and have failed to identify how the existing water network infrastructure will be able to cope with the needs of the proposed development. The urbanization of this greenfield site would have an adverse visual impact on the character of the area, and we would lose the transitionary space between settlement and countryside. In conclusion, I would say that there is great concern among the residents of Midgham and Woolhampton that increased development would lead to the loss of village identity as ribbon development extends its concrete march. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Would you like to remain at the podium in case members have any questions? Do members have any questions for the Parish Council, please? Apparently not. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a bit slow in putting my hand up. I apologise. Sorry, I'm a bit slow in putting my hand up. I do apologise. You mentioned flooding historically. With your local knowledge, could you just expand a little as to what impact there was, probably in 2007 when there was a major runoff of flooding? Do you have any knowledge?
You
that
probably
can
have
assist us?
more knowledge than I, because I moved into the area in 2012.
Ah, okay.
But I am aware that there was significant flooding.
Well, we can pursue that with officers, but thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry. Councillor Richmond. Councillor Bates.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Fenn, I understand that the sewerage works, which this development would add to, is in Station Road. Is that correct?
I believe so.
I haven't seen it, but it seems that there's some doubt about whether Thames Water could actually cope with the additional load. And that's what you believe to be correct, is it?
I did have two local residents contact me on this and say that they were concerned that it wouldn't have the capacity to deal with any extra sewage.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Bridgman, did you have a question too?
No, I was simply pointing out Councillor Mays had his hand
Unfortunately, I
up.
can't see Councillor Mays behind the screen and the pillar. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fenn. I believe that we have an objector, Mr. Matthew Partridge. I'm not sure, is he in the room or is he on Zoom?
Yeah. Good afternoon, or good evening, rather. Hello.
Good evening. You have 5 minutes. Would you like any kind of warning?
No, that's fine. Only to say I'm ready to go when you are. So.
Okay, thank you. Fire away.
Okay, my name is Matthew Partridge and I'm representing the residents of Woolhampton in unanimously objecting to the potential of yet more development on our doorsteps within the paddock at the foot of New Road Hill adjacent to the A4. There are several points of concern. One, local opinion. Alongside the 39 formal objections to this application, I also submit this evening a petition against the plans, which has now accrued almost 150 signatures in the 1 week since the site meeting. This application has received no formal local support. This site falls within Midgham Parish Council, but in reality it is in and will directly affect Woolhampton. Both parish councils have strongly objected to this development. 2, the proposed development will have a harmful impact on the landscape and character of the area. This is a quote from the previous rejection statement in July 2019, and this point still applies and is relevant to this application. The village has already accommodated significant development in the Reed Gardens project next to the railway station and on the site of the former Rising Sun Public House. The substantial development at Reed Gardens by itself contains almost 40 dwellings, many of substantial size, and has fundamentally changed the approach of the village on the eastern side. The elevated nature of the site, like the one in question tonight, significantly increases its negative aesthetic and visual impact on the landscape. The bookend Woolhampton with another generic new build development at the western approach will irreversibly change the character of the village forever. Given all of the housing development we have already had in the village, including the conversion of 2 village pubs into residential housing, we as a resident collective feel that Woolhampton has already absolutely played its part in providing new housing in the immediate area. Point 3, amenities, services and critical infrastructure. Thames Water have not given permission for surface water to be discharged into the public network from this development. Regarding wastewater and sewage, the Thames water system in Wolverhampton is over capacity and Station Road residents have reported the regular backing up of their drainage systems. These have been evidenced in the formal objections. There is no formal detailed plan provided to remedy these issues by the developer to date, despite the comments from Thames Water in the local plan response from the 5th of February 2021, which states a detailed drainage strategy should be submitted with the planning application. This has not been done, or is at least not evident in the plans. Thames Water's response to this overcapacity issue to date has been to deploy tanker lorries to manually siphon to the village STW south of the canal, causing significant disruption. Why is this proposal at decision stage when the stipulation from Thames Water has not been met, especially as it pertains to critical infrastructure with an already identified long-term problem? Also, where is the local impact assessment from the Reed Gardens development to feed into this proposal? Land slippage affecting other local homeowners' properties outside the Reed Gardens development have been reported due to the issues with land retention on such a gradient, similar to the site in question tonight. Additionally, excess water runoff onto the A4 has regularly been reported as a result of this development. Infrastructure within Wolverhampton is already at or over capacity. This is not addressed within the application proposals. 4. Biodiversity impact. As outlined in rejection point 3 in the previous refusal of this application, the impact on local biodiversity will be significant. Policy CS17 of the core strategy requires biodiversity assets to be conserved and enhanced. All development shall maximise opportunities for net gains in biodiversity. A senior planning and biodiversity officer at the Wildlife Trust, who has been consulted by one of the local residents, has advised that the applicant has made an error in calculations, meaning that the proposal would result in a 44.5% loss of biodiversity as opposed to the 25.5% gain they have stated. 5. Road safety. There is a significant concern and should be top of mind when regards to this application. Some points we would like to raise. The proposed ghost lane for access would be the 4th within a 200-yard distance. It is already a precarious section of road to use given the sheer volume of traffic along the A4. All local residents will concur that there is already a speeding issue in the village where once past New Road Hill travelling west, a very large number of vehicles accelerate dramatically with no threat of a speed camera or traffic control. This section of road is also a dangerous place for pedestrians to cross, yet is the most obvious place they will do so, to access the village hall and playground opposite. A development in the site proposed would increase this footfall. This is not a village which needs more housing. What is needed is for the village to be enhanced and improved for the current residents. The infrastructure should not be put under more strain and stress with its character diluted further. So in closing, I would like to reiterate to the committee here this evening, there has been no resident support for this application at all. I've also presented material and planning matters that require your consideration. This application will have an ecological, aesthetic and locally damaging impact. We urge you to do the right thing, listen to the residents, listen to your parish councils and refuse the option for housing development at this location, and instead look to support the local area with a positive, creative, sustainable and supportive plan for its growth and evolution. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. Would you like to remain in case members have any questions, please? Do we any? So, Councillor Pask.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Partridge, thank you for that. That was very comprehensive. You mentioned traffic. Therefore, the one issue you did not mention, and perhaps you could describe briefly, are the difficulties that local residents have in departing New Road Hill, most obviously to turn right towards Thatcham, as opposed to turning left towards the west. The other question I have for you is the one I asked Mr. Fenn, who I hadn't appreciated, wasn't around in 2007. Can you describe, even anecdotally from other residents who I know have been there longer, any impact on water runoff from the hills in that year or any other years? Thank you.
Absolutely, I can. I've been resident in Wolverhampton since 2005, so I'm well versed to answer those questions. So firstly, on the matter of turning right out of the roads in question, I can comment on this. My two daughters have been at Wolverhampton School, so I know very well to get out of the bottom of Wolverhampton Hill at peak hours can take anything up to 5 minutes. And to get out of the bottom of New Road Hill to turn right, where I live on New Road Hill, can take anything up to 5 minutes as well at peak time. And not only that, it's incredibly dangerous to turn right because of the acceleration of traffic once they get past the speed camera coming into the village from the eastern side. So yes, it's a significant problem. As I said in my comments, having 4 ghost lanes within 200 yards is already an incredibly precarious piece of road. And the road itself is extremely narrow. Certainly when I turn up into New Road Hill as well, that ghost lane itself, you can be flanked by heavy goods vehicles on both sides, and it's exceptionally unnerving for even confident drivers. So yes, it's albeit a hopefully low speed piece of road, it is actually quite treacherous.
And potentially the flooding?
So with regards to the flooding, yes, at that point in time, I lived in One Angel Mead, right down by the canal, and the rain in July 2007 and the flooding that came off the back of that was, as I understand it, as a result of the fact that the culverts that were due to take the rainwater from the hill down into the canal just failed because of the sheer volume of traffic of water coming down. That was obviously paddock land at the bottom of the road at the time. So even with the potential drainage that offers, those culverts still failed. And the new road, well, A4 at one point was at least a foot underwater in the middle. A ride-on lawnmower had been washed down from the top of the hill into the middle of the A4. And our house at One Angel Mead was very, very nearly flooded itself, even though it was a good 100 yards away from the A4, 150 yards away from the A4. It was a significant event in this village and probably the most traumatic thing that's happened to the residents since we've moved into the village almost 20 years ago. So the thought of having that drainage capability taken away and effectively sheer tarmac running down onto the A4 in certain areas is certainly not a good prospect.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Partridge? Is that Jeff? That's the base.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Mr. Partridge, you mentioned the fact that the Thames Water actually tanker the sewage or excess water across the canal to the south side. I assume, therefore, that the bulk of the effluent is normally in a pipe which goes under the canal, but the excess is being tankered across, which is a big problem when the canal has, of course, a lift bridge. Have you any comment on that one?
Yeah, absolutely, and I can comment on that as well. I mean, most of the tankers that go down the road, down Station Road, over the canal bridge, over the train tracks and the level crossing, a lot of that happens late at night as well. It causes and has caused significant damage to the roads down there. It's not used to heavy goods vehicle traffic down there. And the disturbance, having been a former resident of Angel Mead, is significant. And some of that pumping out can carry on at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, causing significant interruption to the neighbourhood in that area as well. So it's something that has been contested on several occasions by the residents to Thames Water directly. It's always been rebuffed. It doesn't seem to have been anything other than worsened by the Reed Gardens development as well. And to put another development in that is reliant upon that aggregation of sewage down to a single connection down Station Road seems adverse to what the village requires in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Partridge. We'll take it up with the drainage officer later in the session. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Mr. Partridge? Thank you. Could we move on then to the applicant or agent rather? I believe is joining us on Zoom, via Zoom.
I'm just promoting them now, Mr. Vice Chairman. Apologies, it's taken a moment.
Can you hear and see me, Chair? Sorry, you're on mute.
So, Mr. Bond, you also have 5 minutes to address the committee, and if you could remain when you finish speaking for any questions, please.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chair and members. Good evening. This proposal, in our view, has significant merit. The site is an acceptable one for residential development owing to its well-contained characteristics, with strong defined boundaries comprising existing development to the north, east, and partly to the south, with mature woodland to the west. Therefore, the site relates more to the built settlement of Woolhampton than the more open countryside that lies further to the west. This too is supported by the evidence base to the last local plan. The site was not rejected for any specific reason other than only one site at that time should be allocated at Woolhampton. These matters are reinforced by the proposed allocation of the site in the emerging local plan. In addition, that proposed allocation represents a material change in circumstance since the last application was refused. Furthermore, and having listened to the exchanges from both the parish council and the local resident, it is also relevant to note that the last refusal of the application was not on grounds of access, highways, trees, drainage, flooding, or even foul drainage. That's an important point to recognise. As to the weight to the emerging local plan, this is in part determined by the existence of any substantive objections to a proposal. Only one objection has been received to that local plan allocation, but as officers confirm, they consider that the matters raised are not significant that would warrant removal of the site as an allocation. Accordingly, the residential allocation of the site is anticipated to remain. The council's local plans team reconfirms this. In these factual circumstances, NPPF paragraph 48B confirms that weight can be attributed to an emerging local plan allocation where there are no unresolved objections, as is the case here. NPPF paragraph 50 also confirms that prematurity to an emerging local plan will seldom be justified as a reason for refusal. Your officers agree. For all these reasons, and in this particular case, the principle of the proposed development can be supported. In respect of landscape and visual impacts, the site is well enclosed, relates well to its built context, and the localized impact of visual change to the site itself, not the wider area, is limited. The principle of development, including the support of an inevitable residential allocation, outweigh this small degree of impact. All other issues, including site access, highways, housing mix, density, infrastructure, affordable housing, residential amenities, include trees, ecology, including ancient woodland, flooding and drainage, have all been successfully addressed as confirmed by the comprehensive technical responses from statutory consultees. So to conclude, in this case, other material considerations arise, namely the largely uncontested emerging local plan allocation and the inherent suitability of the site supported by NPPF paragraphs 48B and 50. These confirm that permission can be granted in this case other than in accordance with the development plan and consistent with the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you again for taking the time for listening.
Thank you. Could you remain for questions, please?
Of course.
Councillor Law, I believe you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, for giving me the opportunity. Mr. Bond, you have stated during your presentation there were no unresolved objections outstanding in the development of the emerging local plan. I refer you to page 28 and 29 of our report, which is the comments made by Thames Water. I'll give you an example. Water comments. Thames Water has identified an inability of the existing water network infrastructure to accommodate the needs of this development. Would you describe that as an unresolved objection or not?
I would not describe that as unresolved because the Thames Water have a statutory duty to provide both water and drainage to proposed properties. And in addition to that, sir, you may notice that there is a planning condition. It's number 33, which confirms that no development will take place until those issues regarding foul water drainage capacity
Or resolved?
Are resolved.
So they
And
are.
that is sorry.
Not currently resolved. That's my point I'm making. Thank you.
No, if I may finish in response to your question, that is how the planning process addresses those types of issues. So in that sense, where a condition can apply that resolves an issue, then that is the way that the planning system addresses those matters, such that that does not represent an embargo on the proposed development of the site. As I said earlier in the speech, the determination of the last application also confirmed that too.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, please, for Mr. Bond? Mr. Bond, that concludes the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
On then to questions for officers. Sorry, board member, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I wouldn't let you get away with that one. May I start by thanking those members who were able to attend the site visit, which were a sizable number of you. It's always good, and especially, I think, really good on this application to attend that site visit, because you will have noticed we started this at 6:30, left there just after 7, which one would assume would be a fairly quiet part of the day. But you will recall, it didn't take you 5 minutes to exit from New Road Hill, but it did take a significant waiting for traffic, even in that off-peak time. Traffic is the main issue here, but our planning officer has, of course, raised lots of other issues. So I think if he has, it's good that I do too. But let me just concentrate, first of all, on the highways issues. I will turn you to page 39, paragraph 658, and quote, "The provision of additional accesses onto major roads such as the A4 is not normally supported by highways officers." And in some respects, it goes on to say it may be preferable to have an access serving the site from New Road Hill. I'm sure the residents of New Road Hill wouldn't agree with that, but it's the proximity. And if whilst I'm talking, our planning officer could put up the site map that displayed the road network around there, I'd be very grateful. I perhaps should have started by asking him. Members, we've had lots of interesting comments about the principle of development. We were told by our planning officer and those of us who recall very recent meetings of this committee that this is not developable under policy C1 of the HSA DPD. So I'm not going to make a statement of what I feel about the proposal under para 48 of the NPPF, but I will pose the question for members to ponder, and that is, we have completed Regulation 18 consultation. This local plan gains weight through the whole of the local plan procedure. We still have another whole consultation period to go, and I'm posing the question, do members feel that the local plan is sufficiently far progressed in order for this to be determined? I'm not saying it's premature, I'm just saying is it progressed enough? I have some very experienced members on this committee, Chairman, who I'm sure will pursue that point. Thank you for putting up that display, that map display. I go back to highways issues. New Road Hill is to the right. The site is entirely within Midgham. Those houses shown on the extreme right-hand side, the boundary of the parish is the middle of New Road Hill, so that is Woolhampton. South of the A4, where you have, is it Crow Cottage and Ridge House, and that driveway which goes down to the village hall is Woolhampton. Now, I'm a regular attendee at Woolhampton Parish Hall for the parish council meetings. When I leave there at 8:30 at night, there is no difficulty turning right in order to turn left up New Road Hill back to Bucklebury. When I attended a community event on Sunday, the exact opposite was true. Midday, Sunday, would you believe, to turn right, it was clear coming from the left, from Thatcham. I was about to go where someone accelerated very hard out of the village from the right, heading towards Thatcham, to the extent that they hit the brakes pretty hard. So I concur wholeheartedly with the concerns expressed by local residents that this is a very busy road. And as Mr. Partridge said, the shadow lanes where you have to wait to turn right off the A4, despite the road width, which I know Mr. Dowding will be able to talk more about and we can question him about, is actually surprisingly narrow when it comes to the heavy goods vehicles. Chairman, I won't go on too much at length, except to say I am concerned about the cumulative effect of traffic. Woolhampton has recently had in excess of 40 houses to the eastern end of the village, plus others. I am concerned by, I know there is an officer of BBOUT living in the vicinity, and when he says there is a loss of biodiversity, my ears prick up and I pay attention. Chairman, I will conclude at that and be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Timed very well. Any questions for Councillor Pask? Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, two questions. You raised the point about the emergency plan. Would you say there's some similarity to Pinson's? That's the first question. And the second one, I don't know if I can ask it, but I am going to ask Gareth Dowding after that about the ghost lane, because you did mention about traffic. And it was discussed at the site visit.
It was indeed. Thank you, Councillor Linden. I mean, I'm not really qualified to. We have to determine this application and its merits, as members know. So the cheeky answer to it is yes. We had concerns over that application that you mentioned just now, and members said that it was not under C1. The difference with this is proposed in the local plan. The Pinson's Hill one wasn't, and I certainly have my views which I've expressed about the shadow lanes. I think Mr. Dowding is well placed to give us some more technical answers that I'm not quite so capable of. I've expressed my view that it's the proximity of the junctions that cause me greatest concern, as well as the speed of the traffic. But for traffic turning right like this, especially when the highways officer himself has written the provision of additional accesses onto main roads is not normally supported. The additional accesses, brackets so close together, is not normally supported. So they're the questions I will be asking Mr. Dowding. So I've given you my personal opinion, but it's not a professional one.
Thank you, Chairman.
Any more questions for Councillor Pask? Councillor Linden.
I'll wait for the other two.
I'm sorry, I think Councillor Law was first, wasn't it?
I think if you'd use a microphone if you're going to ask him a question.
I've just demonstrated. Sorry, could you speak into your microphone? I'm having difficulty in hearing.
Well,
age is coming upon me. Thank you.
Yeah, my microphone's on because I think he's asked me to speak. Is that correct, Chairman?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I think you've said I could ask my questions of officers.
I did indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a very general question actually for officers. It's for our own personal curiosity more than anything else. This application is for access only. Why on earth, therefore, have we got conditions on lighting, conditions on biodiversity, lots of conditions on landscaping, sustainable drainage? Just a general question. You know, I really don't understand why we spent a lot of time on that, on these such conditions when we're really looking at access only. It's curiosity for. I'm a bit long in the tooth, but I've not come across this before. Specific question actually is to the highways officer. We've heard references from the ward member who knows this junction much better than I do, although I do know the junctions. They're going through Woolhampton and the well-known speed traps. And I've heard also from the objectors talking about it's a treacherous road. So I'd be interested to hear from the highways officer. Do we have a number of accidents over the last 5 years there? Can you give us some sort of an indication? Would he describe this as a treacherous piece of road? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Mr. Shepherd?
Chairman, I think I'll answer the first question and then I'll pass to Gareth. When you're considering an outline application, you're also considering the principle of development. The reserve matters are access, appearance, layout, landscaping and scale. So essentially the detailed design of the proposal. So there are a lot of fundamental planning considerations that come into the principle of development. So anything that is not specifically related to one of those 5 detailed design considerations has to be dealt with on the outline. So it's principal fundamental issues and detailed access in this case, but we have to recognise that the precise layout, landscaping, appearance and scale could be subject to change at reserve matters.
Thank you, Bob. I should have known all of that, but thank you for the reminder. Thank you.
I didn't know that either. Mr. Dowding, could you address the highways issues, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I'd be asked about the accident record along that stretch of road. So I checked it prior to tonight's meeting. In the last 3 years, which is the up until December 21, which is the latest figures we've got, there are no reported incidents in the vicinity of that junction. The nearest location of any reported incident is at the junction with Station Road. There were 2 accidents reported there, and then there was a further accident further east away from that location. So actually in the vicinity of that junction, the vicinity of the speed camera, in the vicinity of the site, there are no reported injury accidents in the last 3 years.
Thank you. Councillor Law, is that a legacy hand?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
I think Councillor Bridgman, that you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 questions, if I may. I'll start with a question which I did anticipate with Bob Dray at the site meeting. I'm still bemused by the answer, which is at 6.34 about affordable housing. We are told that it's 40% rounded up. Well, 40, according to the report, so 6 units bracket rounded up, close bracket. Well, 40% of 16 is 6.4. You round that up, you get 7. My maths says. So that's the first easy one, Bob.
Now I understand where you got that point from. That's an error. Apologies. It's the planning obligations SPD says rounded up or down to the nearest whole unit. So because it's 6.4, it's down. So I understand now. Apologies. It's 6 units is policy compliant.
Perhaps more difficult. I develop the question that Councillor Linden raised with Councillor Pask. And I do refer to a previous application because we debated long and hard over this particular point about the situation of policy C1, that is development outside a settlement boundary, and the emerging local plan. And there's a lot in the pack about that debate. And I do say that what is in this pack, but wasn't, and I've double checked this evening, in either the Eastern Area pack or the district pack for the Pinson's Lane application is reference to paragraph 50 of the NPPF. Had that been in the pack, we might have had a subtly different debate. I don't know. I simply say this is the first time I can see that we've been referred to paragraph 50. So I just want to understand paragraph 50 of the NPPF, which is referred to at 6.29 of the pack.
Thank you. Paragraph 50 was raised at those meetings. It may not have been referred to in the report. Premature.
Can I develop the question, and then we'll see? So you've got the whole thing in the round.
Yeah.
So what 50 refers to is prematurity being seldom being justified where a draft plan has yet to be submitted for examination. So my question, to some extent, develops, I think, what Councillor Pask was getting at, as to the stages of local plan preparation. So I've Googled the stages of local plan preparation, and I am told that the 4 bullets that the Town Planning Institute comes out with are evidence gathering and early stage consultation, that's Reg 18. Then pre-submission publication stage, that's Reg 19. Then submission of document and independent examination, Reg 22. And finally, Inspector's Report adoption, Reg 24. So my question is, where does the council, where do the members of council sit in that process? Because you'll recall our debate last time round on this particular point, that what I was saying was that unlike the HSA DPD, where I vividly remember the debate about sites, and in the other site in Woolhampton that's been referred to tonight was one of those sites. I vividly remember the debate about sites. Now, my perception is that we haven't had that debate about sites this time round. So even though this plan has not yet been submitted for examination, are we not somewhat early in the process? And therefore, why does paragraph 50 apply?
What I'll do to answer that is I think I have to explain paragraph 50 first, if you can bear with me, and then I'll defer to Brian to explain the stages because he'll be more familiar than me. But before that, I'll try and explain why we're giving the weight we are, because it's ultimately a question of weight on the emerging plan. I want to differentiate paragraph 50 and prematurity from giving weight to an emerging plan. They are 2 different things. Prematurity is a specific policy that if you approve a development before a local plan has progressed to completion, you threaten undermining the plan as a whole. So, for example, if you had 2 strategic sites competing with each other, would be an obvious example. There's very clear guidance that prematurity should not come into our decision-making process at this stage. It's only really valid, say, if we're at examination. So we've had to square that off in the report, but I would advise against that. That's not the discussion we should be having at this stage. The key question for members, I think, tonight is the weight you give to your current plan and your emerging plan. And we've given you explain paragraph 48, which explains why you can give weight to an emerging plan and the 3 considerations you take into account on that. I'll go through them all and then I'll pass on to Brian about the stages, if that's okay. The first one is consistency with the NPPF, and clearly we obviously think our plan is consistent with the NPPF where we're heading so far. Unresolved objections has been mentioned in the report, and planning policy have looked at the number of objections that have come through. It's a small number as set out in the report. I think 1 objection, 2 support, 1 being the promoter, and then a couple of comments. And they're satisfied that the issues that have been raised in that are nothing that would change their opinion, recommending to full council. As set out in the report, we've also it's all about confidence, essentially, the weight you give to the emerging plan, and so you don't undermine the process. We have confidence that Woolhampton will remain a service village, so we'll attract the same level of growth that it did, for example, in the HSA DPD, what we're looking at here. We also know that there are no other alternatives in Woolhampton because there's other sites that have been promoted have been excluded on fundamental grounds, such as flooding, for example. So, red flag grounds. So, whereas if this was in Newbury, for example, where we'd have a basket of sites to select from, there's a more confidence relative in that respect. So that's why that's our thoughts on that point. And then the final point is the stages of the stage of preparation. I'll defer to Brian in a second, but normally at this stage we would be given relatively limited weight because you're right, there's still a further round of consultation to go. For those foregoing reasons, we think that there is more certainty than there ordinarily would be at this stage for this particular site. We've looked at the wider area for the eastern area, for example, with the AWE constraints, etc. And so it's all of these things that are factored into our confidence that this is like to get approval. You're right. I'll pass to Brian to explain the rest, but that's where we're coming from here.
Chairman, before we go to Brian, can I just say thank you, Bob, for a comprehensive response to that question. That really was excellent.
Mr. Little, would you like to comment?
Yeah, certainly, Chairman. Regulation 18, Council has deferred the production of the local plan to the Planning Advisory Group to produce the draft plan and consult on it. At Regulation 19, Council approve the plan for final consultation before submission. The plan is then submitted and goes to the examination. And once the inspector's report is received back by the local authority, then it goes back to council to either approve the inspector's local plan changes or reject them outright.
Okay.
If I may then, Chairman, where does that leave a planning authority that is faced with an emerging local plan and a site within it, is faced with the argument that if it rejects the planning application, it will fall foul of the appeal process because it isn't taking account of the emerging local plan, but then subsequently in full council rejects that whole or that aspect of the local plan?
In the courts, I'm afraid. We have there is a problem in terms of you have the local plan that is ideally takes 3 years to produce, can take longer. Indeed, some examinations in Berkshire have lasted over 6 years with the inspector. At the same time, we have a planning application system that has 8 or 13 weeks for determination, and an appeal that can come forward within 1 year after the appeal being submitted. And that can have fundamental changes to planning policy as a result of whatever the inspector determines for that individual application. Mr. Dre has already set out the planning balance that we have to consider on all applications and on the merits. And the considered opinion of officers in this time is that the planning balance is tilted in favour of this development for the reason that both the report and Mr. Dre has pointed out. The 3 sites that came forward in Midgham, 2 are they are undevelopable without significant flood risks and ecological habitat risks and all the rest of it. This proposal has taken all of those comments that are in the HELA that's publicly available and has addressed those.
Okay. I think Councillor Pask is next.
Thank you, Chairman. The question I forewarned Mr. Dowding about. Mr. Dowding, we as members of this committee all know of the government's manual for streets, and that therefore certain judgmental comments from highways are based very much on actual measurement and no what I would call layman's logic. Having said that, I think the layman's logic here is powerful. We have heard, I have experienced, I'm sure you have if you've been out there, the significant difficulties of exiting roads. And yet, and I appreciate, I don't think they're your words, are they? The provision of additional accesses onto major roads such as the A4 is not normally supported by highways officers. And I'm taking that to be within the proximity of another road, which is actually well used. It has a significant number of houses within it or along it. And many of which will generate traffic wishing to exit both directions of the A4, but I suggest a significant proportion to turn right. There's also another immediate junction just beyond that, of course, that of Woolhampton Hill, which at these peak times generates a lot of school traffic because there is no safe path for children to walk to that school. So this will be not the second junction in close proximity on a very busy A road. It'll be the third. May I have your comments, please?
Certainly, yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. If you were to continue reading that paragraph 6.58, it does actually go on to say, however, in this instance, having the development accessing and fronting onto the A4 would insist in providing an active frontage in line with the government's manual for streets. And that is where we have made our decision. The fact that, yes, normally we do not encourage any form of access onto an A road or a principal road. It's not just because it's so close to other junctions, because it's an A road. But in this case, to develop the active frontage as recommended by Manual for Streets and as guidance given to us by the government, this is why it's been decided that this access here onto the A4 is more appropriate than a side access into New Road Hill. The proximity of two other right turn lanes along the A4 is not a reason for concern for us. And in fact, this third right turn lane into the site actually obviously follows the precedence which has already been set by the two other right turn lane arrangements. Obviously, the road is wide, and these right turn lanes offer a refuge of some sort, and I can give you dimensions if you so wish, as someone has been out and measured it, but offers a refuge for vehicles to wait in to make the right turn manoeuvre into these side roads.
Well, if I could come back on that, Chairman. I mean, thank you, Mr. Dowding. You've covered very clearly, and I leave members to make their to use their judgment about traffic turning into those roads, turning right off the A4. That is eastbound traffic. Westbound traffic. I beg your pardon. I was also referring to the difficulties of exiting those roads onto the A4. Could I have a comment about that, please? In that we now would have, if this goes through, three fairly significant volumes of traffic, all trying to access the A4 within a very short period, space of time, distance.
Thank you. Yes. It is the same as accessing any road. There will be periods of time on the network where it is busier than other times. These refuge islands, although they are primarily for right turning land, they also provide refuge for a right turning vehicle out of the site. And quite often that the vehicle turning right into a site, we'll see a vehicle attempting to turn right out of the site, and will ease back and allow that right turning vehicle to make use of the right turn lane to then progress further in the direction which they wish to go. Yes, there are periods along the A4 where it will be extremely busy, but also there are periods when it is quieter. I'm afraid that it's just the nature of what the peak hours are. It's just one of those things, unfortunately.
Okay, Councillor Past. Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman. I know this is quite far back, but I was told of someone's son who died sometime in the 1980s, so a fertility around there, but it may be further down the road near the petrol station. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. But my question to Gareth Dowding is, it was raised, I think, by Mr. Matthew Partridge, and he also mentioned it during the site visit, and that was concerning the ghost lanes. And I just wondered if you've got any comments on that, please.
Yes, yes. The road has been measured, and I can give you dimensions. The right turn ghost islands do vary in width from, I've just got them here written down, from 2.9 metres down to 2.1 metres, depending on where they are measured along the A4. So we are hopeful that by a modification of condition 20, which is in the back of this agenda, that we will be able to have the lining and the ghost islands more regulated, not just this new ghost island, but the existing ghost islands. So they are all more regulated, so the running lanes and the ghost islands are all of a more uniform width, which would obviously then aid people not just into this new site, but also into the existing sites along the A4.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bridgman, you have another question?
I do, if I may, Chairman. And it's on the biodiversity point that was raised by the objector. And I just want to understand officers' response to what was said in relation to the question of whether there's a net biodiversity gain or a loss, and how we ensure that there is a gain. And secondly, I have read and reread suggested conditions 26 and 31. I can see they're different, but I can't quite understand how. Could someone explain what the real difference between 26 and 31 is?
Thank you for your question. In terms of biodiversity net gain, paragraph 6.77 of the report outlines that there's a quantifiable net gain for biodiversity in relation to habitats of 25.44% and 3.9% in relation to linear habitats. This is significantly in excess of the 10% contained in the Environment Act 2021, that will not be enacted until 2023. Our ecology officer is content with the level of biodiversity net gains proposed within this application. We have been in consultation with BBOUT on this, and they did raise an initial concern with the calculations. This was through a period of consultation and negotiation, something that was changed by the applicants and the agents to the point where BBOUT, Louisa Medland, confirmed securing net gains through planning conditions was a sound way forward, and that's why officers have proceeded with this. In addition, our ecologist is content with the net gains that can be delivered from this site.
And the two different, what do the two different conditions do differently?
Would you want me to answer that, Matthew?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Condition 26, biodiversity measures. We are currently on biodiversity matrix 3.01 by DEFRA, and the inclusion of this condition in the application ensures that when the reserved matters come forward, we will be able to use the latest biodiversity matrix that has been issued by DEFRA. So it means that we can have the most up-to-date information out there. And then when you go on to the biodiversity enhancements, it's basically saying that no dwelling shall be occupied. So there is a catch-all there that prevents the developer trying to slip out of their biodiversity enhancement requirements. So condition 26 says they have to submit a new up-to-date biodiversity matrix in line with whatever the DEFRA methodology is at the time. And then the 31 is saying if you haven't done that, you can't occupy your dwellings.
Well, I simply point out that the second sentence of 26 refers to not occupying a dwelling until the measures relating to that dwelling have been installed or constructed, but I'm not going to die in a ditch over this one, so I'll leave it there.
I can understand the point Councillor Bridgman's making. If you do grant permission tonight, maybe if we could delegate authority to review those two conditions together. I think they are serving different purposes, as Brian says, but whether there's some clarification that can be put in to both secure the net gains and achieve that output, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pass, do you have another question?
I do, Chairman. I think Councillor Law is ahead of me.
Beg your pardon, Councillor Law.
That's fine. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like guidance from the officers, please, on the question and answer session I had with Mr. Bond on the on Thames Water. He seemed to say that even if Thames Water are saying they can't really support this, that if we were to approve this site, they're obliged to supply water. They're obliged to take all the waste. Are they? Is the question.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Yeah, there's two systems that run in parallel. So the Thames Water, or the water undertaker or the sewage undertaker, are obliged to make the connections under separate legislation. And they are funded in providing that infrastructure through bills, etc. There is a separate process for it. So it doesn't you won't find Thames Water objecting to a planning application, but they will identify where the existing network capacity is insufficient. So in this case, that's what they're doing. They're saying, at the moment, we do not have the capacity for this, or we're unsure we have the capacity to do this. And that's why you have those two conditions, which were mentioned earlier, 33 and 34, which are basically saying, don't do the works until we've even confirmed.
Yeah, no, I noticed the conditions. I was just thinking, so if it turns out to be physically impossible to do, however, but you're saying that can't happen, they've got to do it.
They are obliged to do it. It's the routine way it takes place. The only way planning normally gets involved is phasing. So if you have a major development, we had it on one recently where, I think it was on the last committee, we said no more than 50 dwellings until they've done the improvement work separately. So that's normally how the planning system gets involved. But no, I think that is correct how it's portrayed to you.
Right. My apologies for coming back with another question, Chairman. We do have a senior engineer for flooding here. I'd like to ask Mr. Bowden a question, please. We heard quite definitively from Mr. Partridge of the flooding issues, admittedly in a 1 in 100 year event in 2007. And we do, of course, as members of this committee, understand what SUDS, sustainable drainage, does or is meant to do. Mr. Bowden, I'm seeking your reassurance. We are concreting over, to use a vernacular, another green field here. Green fields do absorb moisture as well as CO2 and other things that are not quite so good for us. Can I have your assurance, please, that you are confident, bearing in mind the lie of the land, the topography here, that the measures put forward are adequate?
Good evening, Chairman and members. The best way of answering this is that I don't know whether you've got access to figure 12 in the flood risk assessment that the developer provided back at submission stage, but there is an undertaking by them that any off-site discharge will be reduced. Yeah, that's the plan. There's a note there that middle right of the drawing, control device, and the 1 LS, that's 1 litre a second or per second off-site discharge. So the developer has undertaken that the maximum off-site discharge will be 1 litre per second, which is relatively small for a site of this size and a development of this type. So all water will be, or the developer will be required to retain all water on site up to the 1 in 100 year plus 40% climate change event, and not allow any more water than that 1 litre a second off the site. So that, to us, that means that the site will not increase flood risk elsewhere in the village or out of the site boundary.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Bass?
Thank you, Chairman.
Who would like to start the debate? Councillor Bass?
Oh, well, someone's got to start it, Chairman, and I'm happy to do so. I will be brief because a lot of the points, I hope members have got a flavour of where I am coming from. We've had representations from a very significant number of people. We've heard there's a petition now going around which we haven't seen the evidence of, but I trust is accurate. Over 100 signatories. We've had all the letters of objection, and the concerns are very consistent, and I share a lot of those concerns in terms of, despite Mr. Dowding's endeavouring to reassure us about traffic, and I do appreciate, of course, that at peak times traffic onto major roads does slow things down. I appreciate also that there are no reported injury accidents at that site. I'm delighted to hear that. No one likes anyone to be injured, but I still have grave reservations about 3 roads being in such close proximity. The other issue that I ask members to consider and debate, please, is I'm not going to use the word premature because we've been asked not to, and I don't think it is premature. What we know is this site is not developable under C1 of the HSA DPD, and I ask members, despite, and I am on the planning advisory group, so I do know what we are doing here, but I do consider that we do have another consultation, Reg 19. We haven't actually put this is progressing through the system. We hear the words that there are no other developable sites in Woolhampton because the 2 that were put forward are not developable, and they are indeed are not, in my opinion. We understand that Woolhampton is a service village. It has two good pubs, actually, a railway station, a bus route, a main road going through it, a petrol station, there's a church up the hill and so on and so forth, and a school up the hill. But the automatic implication is, well, therefore, let's put more houses there. Chairman, I do have reservations about this site. There is a lot of local concern, which is why it's come to us at this planning committee. I am uneasy about it. I'd like to hear the views of other members of the committee before making a judgment. Thank you.
Councillor Law.
Thank you once again, Chairman. Before I really get into this, I'd like to try to clarify from my own memory a few things that were commented on by other members of the committee. First of all, the fact is we have had no debate on this site in the developing plan. That's not true. We did about 18 months ago take the whole list of proposed sites to the various parish councils, and we had the planning team, the policy team, did in fact go to 3 or 4 locations over the course of a couple of weeks and present, and we got feedback. We had been planning, got feedback from the parish councils on those sites that were proposed. So we have had a debate, not necessarily, and we've had the Reg 18, which followed those. Which followed those debates and presentations. So it's not true to say that this is a surprise. It's also, if I go back, Pinson's Hill's been mentioned, and I don't like the fact we shouldn't be comparing really, but there are some similarities. But I got to say that whilst it may not have been in the papers about paragraph 48, it was discussed. And prematurity was discussed. I know because I raised it during the initial debate at Eastern Area. So it was in fact discussed. Moving on to this one as to where we are, I've got a lot of empathy with the ward member here. He knows the area pretty well, but particularly on the highways issue. And there is the sort of the common man's view. Well, why are they doing that? On the other hand, I'm listening to the highways people, The road has not been defined as treacherous. There haven't been any serious accidents, personal injury in the last 3 years in that particular section of road. Given what he has said in this meeting and written down, I think if we were to turn this down on highways grounds, we'd lose that on appeal, simply for what the highways officers' position would be. The other aspect is one of balance, and this is a really difficult one. Where exactly does the weight? Where are we in this emerging plan that says we should be putting more weight on this one than on the previous one? But I've got a little bit of a slightly different thought process on the existing plan, if you don't mind. Woolhampton is a service village. And it is a service village. It's in the hierarchy. And by the way, if you read C1 carefully, it actually says that allows some development inside and adjacent to the existing settlement boundary of service villages. Now, perhaps 16 houses is a little bit too much, but it's got to have identified need. So I suspect when the application was considered previously and probably rejected as contrary to the current plan, it was probably a balanced decision because the current plan does allow for some development in a field adjacent to a service village. So I'm sitting on this one, and I'm interested in what a few other members may think. To me, it's coming. I can't reject this on highways grounds. I don't feel that would be valid. The whole thing will be how much weight am I giving to the emerging plan versus the existing plan, and I really don't know yet. I'm sitting on the fence on this one so far, so I'm interested in how other people feel.
Councillor Cotton.
Thank you, Chairman. Between a rock and a hard place here, we're being told, well, we can't really refer to the draft emerging local plan because really it's not ready and relevant. Whereas we have in the past on the current local plan refused this. Okay, that gives me great concern. Nothing's been mentioned of street scene or character of the village. And this is just going bang, here you are. Here's a block of houses. Maybe if this had come through more sympathetically and maybe carried on, the housing on the left-hand side, the west side of the road that we parked in, that would have a great more sympathy. But it's why are we being asked to overturn something that we already have refused, but we're still applying the local plan that we have, and we're being told again and again we can't refer to the draft emerging local plan. So I'm equally uncomfortable with this.
Councillor Somner.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd agree. This is not straightforward, is it really? But I have to say, I know the road. I've used the road. I come through from the eastern area. When I'm on the way through this way, this is generally the way that I would come. So yes, I can sympathise with concerns about the speeds that are done through that road, but it is a 30-mile-an-hour stretch. There are cameras at either end of it. And for those that are sensible drivers, those are the speeds that they drive at. They're already slowing down considerably at that point when they're going east, and they should still be slow when they're going west. However, we all know that driving standards are maybe not what they ought to be. And we've all witnessed the poor driving that decides that halfway through the zone they will start to speed up. Maybe that's something that could be picked up separately, and it would need to be separately by Mr. Dowding and his team as to whether there is any reinforcing of signage or painting on the road or anything like that. That can't be part of today's discussion, but I just mention it for something that could be for consideration later. I did want to pick up on a couple of the points that my colleague, Councillor Pask, has raised with regards to pulling out onto the main road. It is a main road. is pulling out onto this main road any more complex through this suggested access than it would be from pulling out of the petrol station at the other end? I suspect probably not when the road's busy. Yes, there are. You know, it's unusual to find so many junctions in such a close proximity. And I, as has been said before, and as Councillor Pask has already probed, the first thing I looked at is, well, why are we creating a new access point when actually we could be looking at using an existing road and putting access off of a side road? Actually, I do wonder whether part of that is the existing parking that's there and the tree that is there that would need to be maintained. For me, and very much on balance, I am leaning towards supporting officers on this, but it is not straightforward. I will say that again. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. If I just start with the question that this is adjacent to settlement boundary in respect of the current local plan, I've just very quickly looked at the refusal decisions last time round, that obviously this was the basis on which this council refused the application, and it certainly wasn't the case that it was refused on ground that it was adjacent. It was refused because it was against C1. It was outside settlement boundary, and we've had that debate about C1 many times. And therefore, and I certainly agree with the sentiments that highways grounds is not a proper reason for refusal of this application. I don't think that one stands up to the interrogation it's been given. I also mention biodiversity net gain and the issues with Thames Water and foul water sewerage, both of which I think are covered by suggested conditions. Where I do have difficulty, as has been anticipated, is the question of the emerging local plan and how much weight we give to an emerging local plan. And I pretty much come down where I came down last time round. We had that debate between C1 and the rest of and ADP, whichever it is for this particular side. And I come down in favour of C1. That the emerging local plan is not sufficiently emerged, is not sufficiently advanced. We are not adjacent to it going to examination. And therefore, I don't think paragraph 50 of the NPPF means that we have no option but to accept this application because it's in an emerging local plan, which is just on the cusp of examination. And that's the way I read that. I do say that we should stick to our guns on policy, stick to our guns on the current DPD, and reject the application on that ground. Now, I do say, as I have said before to local objectors in relation to that, just because it's objected on the current local plan doesn't mean it won't emerge in the new local plan. And that has to be a real issue for the local objectors. That doesn't mean that this site is incapable of taking housing. I just say it shouldn't take housing under the existing local plan, and we should reject it on that basis. Thank you, Chairman.
Is that a proposal, Councillor Bridgman?
I'm happy to propose I just quickly look to see if other members. No, it doesn't look like other members are looking to debate. So I will propose refusal against officer's recommendation purely on the ground that it is against policy C1.
Does that find a second?
Chairman, sorry, beforehand, can I add, if we are to refuse it on that ground, can we also add Section 106?
Of course, yeah. A Section 106, second ground for potential ground for refusal.
Councillor Gossamer.
I'd like to second that.
Okay. Okay, so we have a proposal to refuse the application, and on the grounds of contrary to policy C1, and also failure to can't think of the right word.
Lack of Section 106.
Lack of Section 106 agreement. That's the agreement that okay. Could everybody show, please, in favour of the proposal by raising their hands? And those against? So that's, sorry, any abstentions? I don't think there were. But, yeah. I'm abstaining, yes. Yeah, so I think the proposal is approved and the application is refused. Does anybody need a break before we move on to the next application? 5 minutes? to restart the meeting, and we now go on to application 2102-130 manage land adjacent to 1 Gables Way, Bath Road, Calthrop. I could ask our officer, Michael Butler, to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If you could bring up the site plan, please, Bob, the first one. You see the red line, proposed site plan for those who went to the site visit. So I'll go through this fairly quickly because I'm sure you've read the report and time's moving on, but obviously I'll be happy to answer any questions. This, like the previous application, is an outline application with only access to be considered at this stage. The recommendation summary is that the Service Director of Development and Regulation grants outline planning permission. Just for clarity, there's no Section 106 obligation involved, but there are a number of recommended conditions. The reason the applications come to committee because we've received well in excess of 10 objections. So the development is on a greenfield site immediately to the east of the existing Calthrop Industrial Estate and south of the A4, north of the railway line. It's a flat site, approximately 5 hectares, and just under 20,000 square metres of ancillary, what used to be called B1 is now E1 space, B2 and B8 space. For those who don't know, it's industrial and distribution space are proposed on the site. Just for clarity on the site plan there, the location of the buildings is purely, if I can say it, illustrative because this is an outline scheme, but it does show that the site has the physical capacity to take that level of development satisfactorily in officers' view. In terms of consultations, I'll very quickly run through those on page, the next page, part 4. Midgham Parish Council, in which the development is situated, are objecting, as do Thatcham Town Council. However, your highways officer is recommending approval, and planning policy, they haven't actively supported the scheme because at the end of the day, the recommendation is down to the development control officer, but they've set out the fact that this site, similar to the last site, is recommended for inclusion within the new designated employment areas within the Local Plan Review Regulation 18, with which you've heard a considerable amount in the last debate. I should stress that the Economic Development Officer is actively supporting the application. In terms of minerals, because the site is underlain by minerals, the Minerals Officer is not objecting on mineral sterilisation grounds. Moving on to public representations, we've had one, I think it's one letter of support, but the vast majority are objections, and the reasons are set out on the agenda sheet. In terms of the appraisal, Chairman, in 6.1, there are 6 issues, no, sorry, more than 6 issues, a number of issues which the report examines. The first is whether, in terms of the principle of the development and the development plan, this scheme is acceptable. I'll just stress that irrespective of the fact that this is designated in the current local plan review, this site, for the reasons set out in the policy section, is capable of approval under existing policy CS9, which relates to designated employment sites within the local plan, as it's a site which fulfills the 2 principal criteria within CS9. Again, I won't go through it in great detail, but so I just wanted to stress the point that even if this site had not been designated in the Regulation 18 policies, it could still be capable of approval under existing policy CS9. In addition, the report goes through some detail, which we're happy to answer questions about the employment evidence base, which informs the local plan review. The council commissioned a specific Employment Land Review in 2020, which, whilst it didn't designate sites, set out clear justification for additional B2 and B8 sites across the district. And this was a site that was highlighted as being available and potentially suitable. Well, not potentially, it is suitable. And that's evidenced by the market demand and the fact that this is speculative, but a developer is prepared to actually submit an application on that basis. So in conclusion, we consider in terms of policy that the scheme complies not only in principle with policy ADPP1 in the core strategy, but also in relation to policy CS9. Can I have the next slide, please, Bob? Coming on to the transport and highways implications, as I said earlier, the highways officer has not objected to this application. There will be a new access, as you can see from this plan, directly onto the A4 to the north. And there will be, thanks Bob, the site access, there will be a right turning lane and left in, left out. Clearly traffic going left westbound, if they then need to go eastbound, can turn on the roundabout in close proximity. Again, cutting it fairly short, if I may, in terms of traffic generation, the highways officer is not objecting to the application, although clearly there will be a level of traffic impact on the A4 for obvious reasons. And in fact, not moving away from the traffic impact, the transport statement has noted that there could be a maximum of up to 980 additional movements daily on the highways network onto the A4. As I said before, there are no highways objections, and there's sufficient capacity on site for the car parking. In terms of mineral sterilisation, the site is underlain by gravel, and although it's not a protected site within our minerals local plan, there is a significant gravel reserve there of about 280,000 tonnes, which is approximately 1.5-year land supply for the district for this mineral. Accordingly, officers asked the applicant to produce a viability report to say why this should not be the subject of minerals extraction prior to this development coming forward. And they produced a viability assessment, which our minerals team have carefully examined. And it's quite clear that it would not be financially viable to extract that mineral, unfortunately. And the cost difference, i.e. the net loss, would be about £3.5 million. And that's set out in 6.54 of the report. So although obviously it's regrettable that a minerals resource is lost or sterilised if this application proceeds, our minerals team and myself as case officer have effectively agreed that with an appropriate condition about incidental extraction, the development can proceed on that basis. Can we come on to the next slides with the landscape and visual impact analysis, please, Bob? Yeah, if you go further back up, please. To the beginning of the photos, please, Bob. Thank you. In terms of landscape and visual impacts, the applicant produced an LBIA, which we've had a commissioned landscape consultant looking at carefully. And Appendix 1 of the report, if you managed to read it, it's set out in the agenda, sets out all the detailed implications of the visual impact of this scheme. This slide, for example, is the westward view from the east, looking towards the eastern buffer strip of the trees, which some of you will have seen on the site. There's no doubt, and it's set out in detail in that section in the report, that this development, if it proceeds, will be visible from the wider environment. Move on to the next slide, please, Bob. For example, there will clearly be some impact on the street scene looking south. But in terms of the conditions and the plans that have been agreed, there's a development parameters plan, which is earlier on in the presentation. Thank you, Bob, which sets out how the heights of the buildings will be situated around the site. So in area 3, which is closest to the A4, that will be no more than 10.5 metre to ridge. Areas 2 and 1 further south will be 15 metres to ridge. But the green areas on the eastern and northern boundaries indicate the minimum buffer strips, which will be planted up over time. All the existing buffer strips will be improved to lessen that visual impact. But there's no question that there will be a degree of visual harm that will be generated by this scheme, and I'm happy to answer any further questions on that if necessary. In terms of historic environment, we consider as officers there's very little impact for the reasons set out in the following paragraphs. Much was said about concerns about flood risk and drainage on the committee site visits. And again, we have our council SUDS engineer to answer any questions on that. But we consider that technically with the FRA that's been submitted and negotiations that have been undertaken, principally in relation to policy CS16, we consider that if the scheme does proceed, there will be no harm to either on or off-site drainage due to the measures that have been taken. Can you bring up the plan with the drainage details, please, Bob? I think it's further down. Okay, well, we do, but okay, we'll do that another time if you have questions. Ecology and trees, again, there has been some concerns about impact, but our tree officer has not objected to the application. And we are also content that in terms of sustainable construction and energy efficiency, the scheme is acceptable as it is with external lighting. Before I come on to the overall planning balance and conclusion, I just wanted to draw your attention to the update report. Since the committee report was written, we've received 2 additional letters of strong objections from the adjacent ward members in Thatcham, and I believe they're speaking to those objections tonight. And their principal concerns are set out, summarised. I do say it is a summary in the update report. So I'll leave you to read those, and I'm sure they'll speak to that. And the officer's response to the additional representations is set out again in some detail. We've set out our view as to why the access is acceptable, why we think this site is suitable in terms of the employment land review, why there's a demand for the units and so forth. And at the site meeting, we were asked as officers for additional information about approximate distances to the nearest dwellings. And again, they're set out there. The closest dwelling to the application site is West Grange Hotel, which of course is not a dwelling, which is 132 metres to the north. And there should be West End House there, which is slightly to the north, as you can see, 190 metres to the north. 39 Midgham Marsh is 244 metres to the east, and 38 Midgham Marsh, 290 metres. So they're, in our view, fairly significant distances. We were also asked about heights of the buildings, and the highest point in Two Gables Way, which is immediately to the west, is 13.5 metres. The highest point of the extract building is 10 metres, and then further to the west, it's 12.5 metres. So we're not resiling from the fact that 15 metres is a considerable height. There's no question about that. But it's similar to the heights to the west, not the same, of course. We're then proposing a number of changes to the conditions and additional conditions, and I won't go through those in any detail, but the applicant's agent has accepted those conditions. Therefore, just before I end, Chairman, in terms of the planning balance and conclusion, we consider that whilst this is clearly a greenfield site, which will have an inevitable visual impact, it will have some traffic impact, it may have a degree of drainage impact, but that can be contained. In terms of the overall planning balance and the fact that it's a relatively unconstrained site, particularly in relation to the fact, for example, it's not located in the A or B, for example, and it's immediately adjacent on two sides to a recognised employment area. We consider that since it complies with policy CS9, it is capable of a favourable recommendation subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Could I call on Councillor Fenn from speaking on behalf of Mitcham Parish Council again, please?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I'm fine.
Once again, you have 5 minutes. Do you need a reminder of the time?
No, I should be fine. Thank you. Mitcham Parish Council objects to this application on the following grounds. It is a development in the countryside. It is outside the settlement boundary, and it is a disturbing piece of ribbon development. The core plan reassuringly states that due to Thatcham's rapid and recent expansion, there should be a considerable period of consolidation resulting in no immediate and significant growth in the area. However, this application proposes a potential industrial expansion into rural Midgham beyond the settlement boundary. A recent planning permission for housing in Midgham was refused on the grounds that the area is a rural parish outside any recognised settlement area. Consequently, we are alarmed at the prospect of the destruction of prime agricultural land, the loss of Midgham's identifiable physical boundary, and the disturbing prospect of setting a precedent for further continuous ribbon development. We understand that the applicant was requested to consider reducing the height of buildings in areas 1 and 2 from 15 metres to 12.5 metres. The applicant refused, claiming that the extra height was required for the installation and use of warehouse automation, and dismissed the notion of any increase in visual impact. We can assure you that the extra 8 feet above the tree line will most certainly present an adverse visual impact to the 15 households on Midgham Marsh situated to the east of this site. The report predicts up to 980 traffic movements per day. 980 extra vehicles entering and exiting the already busy A4. Midgham Parish Council are concerned that the volume of traffic movements and the utilisation of robots in the warehouses strongly suggests that the site could be operational 24/7. We do not believe it appropriate that the residents of Midgham Marsh and those living north of the A4 should be subjected to a virtual perpetual motion of traffic noise, traffic pollution, and light pollution. The residents of Midgham Marsh are already blinded by the floodlights operated by Ryder Contract Services on the south side of Colthrop, beyond the railway line and adjacent to the proposed development. We are concerned about the increased risk of localised flooding due to additional surface water as a direct result of existing farmland being replaced by concrete and tarmac. Midgham Marsh, as the name would suggest, already suffers from a surfeit of water. Despite the best efforts of the local farmer, who regularly cleans and maintains the ditches, standing water remains throughout much of the winter months. The site forms part of the East Kennet Valley Biodiversity Opportunity Area, and we are mindful that the core strategy requires biodiversity assets to be conserved. The urbanisation of this greenfield site would have an adverse visual impact on the character of the area. And in conclusion, I would say that there is a great concern among the residents of Midgham that increased development would lead to the loss of their rural identity as ribbon development yet again extends its concrete reach. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fenn. Would you like to remain there for a moment in case there are questions? Do any members have questions? Councillor Pask.
Councillor Fenn, thank you. Appreciating you've only lived there since 2012. You live clearly adjacent to this site on Midgham Marsh. Could you describe to us, and you mentioned the potential for noise, especially if it's a 24-hour operation, are you subject to much noise in the current existing Colthrop area now?
Yes.
And yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You are aware of noise coming from Colthrop.
Thank you. That's what I'm trying to ascertain. And you also mentioned lighting. Clearly, that lighting can be conditioned. What is your view in terms of the type of use that these potential warehouse type buildings could be put to?
Well, the concern I have is that because of the request from the applicant to, I think initially they wanted it to be at 17 meters height, was to accommodate robots. So that leads one to sort of presume that robots don't need to sleep. So they will presumably, they'll be maximizing their workload. And so we could envisage them working 24 hours a day.
Well, thank you for that. It's certainly something I'll be taking up with the agent. Thank you.
Are there any further questions, please, for Mr. Fenn? Councillor Fenn, sorry. No, so thank you, Mr. Fenn. I'm sorry. I didn't see his hand, sorry. Councillor Mays.
Yeah, Mr. Fenn. I've got 2 points. One is obviously with the 900 and odd heavy vehicles entering the site each day, the road junction design at the north end of the site is critical. Have you noted that the road from Cox's Lane does not have a right turn obligation towards Thatcham and Newbury?
Councillor Bates, I think we're getting a little bit away from...
Yeah, but I'm asking if he's noted that. Was he aware of Cox's Lane could not turn right towards Newbury?
Chairman, can I just clarify that questions can only be asked to speakers on matters they've raised in their speech?
Well, that's my second question then is regarding the drainage you talked about. The drainage from the site, I think, is going to be collected and put into the drain alongside the railway line. That drains to the east through the fields of the farm that we visited on the site visit. And then it goes into the Kennet at a later stage, way beyond our site area. Are you concerned that the biodiversity area in the marsh will be affected?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions? So I've got to call on Councillor Ardle-Water and Councillor Jeffrey, please.
Thank you, Chairman.
Town Council.
Yes, indeed.
You have 5 minutes between you. Would you like any kind of warning?
Perhaps if it's sort of 2.25 or 2.5 minutes, you gave us a shout, that would be probably quite handy.
2.5.
Councillor Ardle-Water and I are speaking on behalf of Thatcham Town Council. We shall try to make largely headline comments on the issues raised. I shall emphasise the transport and proposed eastward spread of urbanisation into the countryside beyond Thatcham. The 6.51, I quote, will have a degree of impact on the local transport network. At 6.46, A4 remains within overall capacity. Committee members This development is cited by the developer to produce 980 vehicle movements per day. These will be 24/7, day and night, I have little doubt. The A4 east to junction 12 is already slowed by HGVs, sometimes running at 40 miles per hour. The A4 west passes directly through the residential heart of Thatcham. Anyone familiar with Chapel Street in Thatcham will realise the dire effects of hundreds more HGV movements per week. It doesn't stop there. The A4 West continues into residential East Newbury, at least as far as Robin Hood roundabout, maybe to the Newbury bypass at Speen. This alone should stop this particular proposal. But ironically, West Berkshire Council has rightly pursued the active travel agenda, which seeks to get car users onto their bikes. New cycle lanes have been created, and thus available road widths have been reduced. Two results: more cyclists are commingling with HGVs, e.g. in Chapel Street again, and road space for all traffic has been reduced. Difficult in a brief summary, but getting on for 1,000 additional road movements vehicles per day is not tolerable and possibly quite unsafe. HGVs coming out of the site will grind right around the Thatcham crematorium roundabout. Pretty distressing, I should think, for anybody turning up to a funeral or to a cremation. I will also mention that I believe there is no right turn from Cox's Lane if this proposal goes through in its present form. The urban sprawl that we do not need in or near Thatcham, even though it goes over our border, is not pretty, it's not acceptable, and it's a means, it's not a proper way of conducting a planned development. So consequently, we very much support, we're at the 2.5 minutes, are we? We support the Midgham Parish Council in not wishing to see viable farmland turned into an industrial delivery site. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. And further to Councillor Jeffrey's comments, I'd like to raise some concerns about the stated employment benefits, as in on pages 68 to 70, sections 631 to 641. Starting near the back, my major concern is with paragraph 6.40 and the assertion from Savills Logistics, which candidly doesn't seem like an impartial consultee here, that West Berkshire Council is keen on attracting unskilled jobs into the area. And that, of course, is a bold assertion without any qualifier of what type of jobs those might be. And I would contend, members, that contrary to helping employment in this district, this proposed development would actually hinder and hurt existing employers and would make the action of their businesses still harder. In a little more detail, as members will be aware, Veolia, among many logistics firms, had grave difficulties last year in attracting enough HGV drivers. The last thing they or the existing major employers who Thatcham and Colthorpe already have need is yet more demand for drivers, yet more poaching. So while the plan may look for additional assets in terms of warehouse space, the reality is that the more critical asset here is actually people. And if this was to be approved, this application would suck supply of skilled drivers away from existing operators. It would compete directly for lower cost housing with other people who the district needs and who already struggle to afford to live here. So teachers and NHS staff and social care workers would find it still harder to get affordable houses if there were yet more drivers. As we've heard,
Sorry, could you draw your remarks to a close, please?
Yes, Chairman. So in summary, this development would not have a significant benefit to the district. In terms of traffic, as Councillor Jeffrey has said, it is a positive disbenefit. There is minimal, if anything, in terms of employment benefit. And so I'd also add my voice to urging members to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, please, for Thatcham Town councillors. Councillor Linden.
Yes. You might close me on the question, but
would you constrain your questions to the points that have been raised?
Yes, I am. I'm going to raise it to Councillor Steve Ardnall Water. Is, are you suggesting that this site would be better off as a housing site? Because what you're saying, because of the industrial, low cost homes. I know we've allocated it for industrial.
Sorry, Councillor, I think it's a little bit off the track, off the point.
So no, I'm not contending that, Councillor Linden.
Nor am I.
Your question.
Councillor Law.
So thanks once more, Chairman. I don't mind which of the two councillors answer this question, but looking at their public consultations and representations and what I've heard tonight, they're basically saying that these proposals are the wrong type of job. We don't need more large B8 units. So the Economic Development Officer and the Economic Development Strategy that the council approved is wrong?
Councillor, so it would appear. I absolutely do think precisely what you've just said.
And if I could add further to those words, Councillor Law, my concern is the age of the evidence cited here. For example, the FEMA study of 2016 seems to suggest that, or maybe at the time it did, it certainly isn't the case now, that that we want to grow a logistics cluster, as it's called, around Thatcham. By the contrary, again, we have too many logistics jobs there.
I take your point about 2016, but the Economic Development Officer, maybe you'd like to comment on this, also refers to the West Berkshire Employment Land Review 2020. So that's wrong as well, in your opinion. You're entitled to say, yeah, it's wrong.
In our opinion, yes, it is dated, Councillor Law.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Could I call on Tracy Underwood as an objector, please? And you also have 5 minutes to address the. Would you like a?
Yeah, 30 seconds before the end, please. Thank you. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the objectors. I live in Midgham Marsh, one field behind the eastern boundary of the proposed development. I'm the fourth generation of my family farming at Kennet Home Farm, which abuts the eastern boundary of the site. My great-grandfather started farming there in 1914. There are 15 other families living in and immediately around Midgham Marsh who would also be directly affected by the development. We are extremely concerned regarding the increased risk of localised flooding due to additional surface water from the proposed development. This cannot be allowed to simply drain into the ditches. National Rail very rarely clean out their ditches to the north of the railway line. I grew up in Midgham Marsh and moved away 20 years ago while my family has continued to farm there. I moved back last October. Having just spent a winter there, I have been shocked at how much wetter the fields now are. This winter, there has been ankle-deep standing water in many areas for weeks at a time. This never used to be the case. We are already doing all we can by cleaning out our ditches regularly. Should our fields immediately behind the proposed eastern boundary become any wetter, arable farming in those fields will no longer be possible. Midgham Marsh was almost completely flooded in July 2007, and the cattle were up to their stomachs in water. The council asked the applicant to reduce the height for the buildings in areas 1 and 2 from 15 metres to 12.5 metres. The applicant has refused to do this. Living one field behind the eastern boundary, the extra 2.5 metres in height would have a massive visual impact on us, our neighbours and many Midgham residents. The computer-generated image supplied by the applicant used a photo taken in late spring when the trees to the eastern boundary were in full leaf. All those trees are deciduous, so the visual impact would be very different for 6 months of the year and would create a local eyesore. The colour of the facade has not been stipulated, and a different colour would create a far greater visual impact than seen in this image. The proposed development would cause increased noise, light, and traffic pollution for the local residents. The construction noise would be horrendous. The A4 is already a very busy and dangerous road. I leave to do the school run at 8 a.m. every morning. I need to turn right out of our lane onto the A4, but this is impossible due to the volume and speed of the traffic. I have no option but to turn left, drive approximately 1/4 of a mile to the roundabout nearest the site, turn around and drive back. The proposed A4 road layout changes required by the development would cause huge disruption and delays to drivers if done during the day. If done at night, it would cause disturbance to the local residents. The fact that there would be access from the proposed site directly onto the A4, very close to the existing roundabout, seems reckless given the current volume and speed of traffic. We are also very concerned that the applicant is refusing to reduce the height of the buildings due to the need for automation in warehousing. This implies that the occupiers will not operate a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. business and that there could potentially be traffic noise 24 hours a day. In the report, it states that there could be up to 980 vehicle movements per day. This is an enormous number of extra vehicles on an already very busy road. This will generate not only noise pollution, but carbon dioxide pollution. There is already a huge amount of light pollution from the existing buildings in Colthrop Business Park. When we built an extension on our cottage last year, we weren't even permitted by the council to put an outside light on it. The development would also be detrimental to wildlife and the countryside. I own the field adjacent to the site, and I've already been approached by developers. While this would probably be financially beneficial for me, I refuse, as I don't believe it to be in the best interests of Midgham Parish or the countryside. Ribbon development is creeping along the A4, and if this continues, Thatcham will soon join up with Thiel. Also, the proposed site is not situated in Colthrop as stipulated, but in Midgham. Regarding the ecological report, I do not understand why one static back box was used. Only one static back box was used. When we were building our residential extension in 2020, we had to delay the build by 5 months as we were required by the council to carry out 3 bat dawn dusk emergent surveys in May and June, as bats are not fully active until then. To conclude, I ask you to refuse this planning permission for all these reasons. Being a farmer, I am all too aware that we have to adapt and change with the times. However, permitting this development would not be progress. It would be sacrilege to Midgham Parish and the countryside. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Could you remain at the podium for a moment to see if there's any questions, please? Councillor Pass.
Thank you, Mrs. Underwood. Forgive a question from a bit of a townie, even though I've lived in the countryside for 45 years. But you said about water flooding, well, the standing water on a marsh. That in itself isn't surprising. But how does that impact you as an arable farmer? Does it preclude you from planting certain things? Are you worried that this could make life even more difficult for you?
Yes, absolutely. We're very concerned that this would make the situation probably untenable as arable fields. There are already large areas of the fields now. We have wheat growing in those fields at the moment, and there are areas that you probably saw on the site visit where there are no crops growing because the land is so wet. And if it gets any wetter, we won't be able to farm arable in those fields anymore.
Councillor Mays. Ms. Underwood, can you confirm, please, the statement you made earlier that Network Rail do not regularly maintain the drainage along your boundary and along the railway line?
That's correct. To my knowledge, they sometimes clean out the culverts, but I can't remember when they last cleaned out the ditches. My dad thinks it was several years ago. He's 91. He lives next door to us.
Are you responsible for the drain, or is it Network Rail?
Network Rail are responsible for cleaning out their ditches to the north of the railway line. We are responsible for our ditches within the marsh, which we regularly clean out.
Fine, thank you. Can you confirm that the drainage water drains from the west towards the east, which is where the drain along the Network Rail's alignment joins the Kennet, not the Kennet Avon Canal, the Kennet River?
I would have to look into that, to be honest. My dad would be more knowledgeable on that than me.
Okay, I'll check it later. Thank you.
Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. You've raised, understandably, the question of effectively surface water runoff from this site onto your land, aggravating issues you might already have.
Yeah.
I've looked at the HELA, which is the document that brought forward a number of sites, including this one for potential development in the emerging local plan. And this one's mid-5. And the flood history referred to there is that site isn't within the Environment Agency's recorded flood outlines data set, not reported to have flooded during the 2007 Thatcham surface water flood event. However, parish flood reports are that there's runoff from the A4 and surrounding fields, causing the balancing pond on Gables Way to overtop and cause flooding of Midgham Marsh. Now, the reason I refer to that is because you will have no doubt read the officer's report with some care, and clearly surface water is an issue, and the way in which officers seek to address that is, I think, in condition 12 proposed on drainage, and that is a lengthy condition which has a huge number of elements to it, running to subletter N. So my question for you is, taking into account what is said in the HELA and what is proposed in the, why do you say that this drainage condition would not avert the issues that you raise?
In 2007, Midgham Marsh definitely flooded. The cattle were up to their stomachs in water. I saw that with my own eyes.
Sorry, I wasn't saying that Midgham Marsh flooded. I didn't flood. I'm saying that this site, what we're told is that the cause of the flooding, no flooding for this site. There was no flooding for this site under 2007. I don't think the report's saying that Midgham Marsh didn't flood, okay. And I would certainly accept that you were there and you saw it. It's really a question about why this site would exacerbate the problem, given the condition that is proposed.
I think the extra areas of tarmac and hard standing, where it's now a field, it can drain away. Having more tarmac, it's going to push more water our way. That's what we fear, and I think is likely to happen. In 2007, the canal burst its banks, and that is a situation that could happen again.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I call upon James Walker, who's the agent, please? Is it attending via Zoom?
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Walker. You have.
Sorry, let's turn on the camera.
You have 5 minutes to address the committee. Would you like any kind of warning when your time is expiring?
I should be okay, thank you. Hi, I am James Walker of Savills, planning agent for this application, speaking on behalf of the applicant Ptarmigan Thatcham Limited. This application is for an acceptable and appropriate development which will bring about significant benefits. And as set out by your officer, the proposals before the committee are the result of the applicant working positively and proactively with the council to address comments and concerns. The proposed development will significantly support the local economy. The proposals would deliver around 20,000 square metres of employment floor space in Thatcham, where there is a current pressing demand for such development. The council's employment evidence base identifies a need for an additional 62,000 square metres of industrial floor space, including B2 and B8 uses, and it has been demonstrated that availability for industrial and logistics floor space in Thatcham is at only 4% of current need, so supply is currently severely constrained. The proposals will therefore provide flexible employment space, which makes a substantial contribution to meeting the current and future market requirements and help ensure Thatcham remains a key part of the Thames Valley economic region. Our plans will also deliver around 300 high-quality full-time jobs, including apprenticeships, skilled technical roles and managerial positions, plus around 150 full-time jobs during the construction period, and generate substantial business rate receipts. The application site is a suitable location for a development to meet this identified need and to provide local jobs, with the site being a sustainable location which forms a natural extension of the Colthrop Business Park and which is compatible with uses in the surrounding area. The site is not within the AONB which covers nearly 3/4 of West Berkshire, is not subject to any designations relating to ecology or heritage and is not at risk of flooding. We noted there are 3 key areas raised by members at the committee site visit: highways, the appearance and visual impact of the buildings, and surface water drainage. And I will address these now in turn. Regarding highways, the planning application is supported by a detailed transport assessment undertaken by qualified highways engineers, which concludes that the vehicle movements generated by the development would not have an unacceptable impact on local roads, resulting in a marginal increase in traffic, including at peak hours. The site benefits from an access directly onto the A4 Bath Road with a footpath access provided, which meets technical standards and means the use of local roads by HGVs is avoided. The proposals have been carefully considered by the Council's highways officers, who confirm no objections on each of these grounds. In terms of the appearance of the buildings, we have worked closely with officers and the Council's appointed landscape consultant to agree a position on this matter, and we agree with the officers' conclusion that landscape and visual impacts are acceptable. The 15-metre height limit for buildings to the centre and south of the site is similar to a number of existing buildings within the existing business park, and development next to the A4 is limited to only 10.5 metres. The site benefits from existing semi-mature to mature planting along its eastern boundary, with trees here up to 15 metres in height. The proposals include new planting, which will significantly strengthen this boundary and the northern boundary, with a minimum depth of 10 metres, but up to 15 metres in some areas. And this doubles the existing depth for planting in most places. And this substantial planting will also continue to mature and grow, increasing its effectiveness over time to further mitigate visual impacts. As part of the reserve matters process, a study will be undertaken to confirm an appropriate external colour for the proposed employment buildings to ensure they sit comfortably in the landscape. This is an approach now standard for modern industrial and logistics development across the country, and will ensure any potential visual impacts are further reduced, and particularly in comparison to the existing employment buildings in the area, which are prominent largely because of their white external colour. Finally, in relation to drainage matters, we agree to the drainage condition in the officer's report, which includes the requirement for surface water to be drained at the same level as the current undeveloped site. As demonstrated by the submitted flood risk assessment, the site naturally drains to the water courses to the south and west boundaries, and the development will include a sustainable drainage system designed to have a capacity to accommodate a 1 in 100-year flood event, plus increases from climate change. Water will be discharged into the existing watercourse from the storage ponds to the southern boundary at the current greenfield rate. The development will therefore not at all increase the risk of flooding on nearby land, and that includes land to the east. We therefore agree with your officer's conclusion at paragraph 7.1 and 2 of their report that the proposed development complies with the development plan, including Employment Land Policy CS9, and that all technical matters have been addressed. Further, if any minor adverse impacts are identified, these are outweighed when considered against the substantial economic benefits associated with this development, including meeting local need and job creation. We therefore hope you will approve the plans in accordance with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Pask.
Mr. Walker, thank you for a comprehensive presentation just now. Perhaps you could allay a fear that's been raised 2 or 3 times this evening already. First of all, I appreciate that matters to be considered are access as opposed to detail. And yet a lot of discussion, you mentioned it several times yourself, the height of buildings, the use of buildings, the B class or whatever letter is used these days for these buildings. Why, well, first of all, why is there not any flexibility in terms of height? By that, I mean, people like Extract, I believe the officer said, can operate very satisfactorily in a 10-metre high building, which does lead the conclusion, this isn't a statement, it is a question, Chairman, I promise you, potential B8 does imply 24-hour a day operation. Can you confirm that is a possibility or a definite or absolutely prevented? Thank you.
Yes, well, the final operator for the site is not in place. It's an outline application, so we don't know who the operator is. I would say there is potential for it to operate for 24 hours a day. However, I would point you to the noise assessments that was submitted with the application. That looks at the existing background noise levels and concludes that the scheme can operate in such a way to not increase the background noise levels at the sensitive properties nearby. and it would actually operate under those levels. And we would be happy to confirm that in any reserve matters application that demonstrates that the actual occupiers and hours of use do comply with that with those limits.
Does that answer your questions?
Well, the answers are.
Do you want me to answer about the height? Sorry, there was sort of two questions there.
I would still probe Mr. Walker to see if there's any flexibility in heights should this be approved at this stage and indeed go on to reserve matters.
Sure. So yeah, address that. I would, well, firstly, I think we have demonstrated in the application that 15 metres to those buildings that are away from the road, i.e. the central and southern parts of the site, are acceptable. That is when you consider that there's the substantial planting. I think as the case officer pointed out, 10 to 15 metres, more than double what we've got there at the moment. It will have a very different effect as you currently look at the site from the east, and also the colorization point. We will colour the building in such a way to limit its impacts, and we also tested. Bringing the height down, and it doesn't actually materially change the visual impacts in our opinion. And obviously, as the committee report states, we don't have an objection from the landscape consultant that has been appointed by the council, albeit they, as the case officer stated, they do find some impact there, but obviously that needs to be weighed in the balance, which I think the case officer has done well.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Councillor Cotton.
Thank you. Mr. Walker, you referred to the traffic modelling, but was that supplied by yourself, your company, or was that done by the council?
In terms of the modelling, I'm not sure. In terms of the transport assessment, that was undertaken by a highways engineer appointed directly by the applicant, and then assessed by the council's highways officers. In terms of the actual modelling that underpin that, I don't know is the honest answer. I would need to take advice.
So that engineer, as such, what was his responsibility? What was he doing?
The highways engineer employed by the applicant, his job was to assess the impact of the development in highways terms. And that includes the impact on local roads, the suitability of the access, etc. And as set out in the report, it concludes that it is acceptable in those regards, and that is concurred with by the council's highways officers.
Okay, thank you. And so you also like environmental reports. Was there any consideration given to, for example, on noise, vibration, and fumes of the lorries?
The noise report submitted with the application considers the noise and vibration associated with the development, as explained to Councillor Pask there, that we don't know who the ultimate occupier will be, so it's impossible to do a specific assessment of noise, but what they've done is they looked at the background noise levels and concluded that these types of uses can operate in such a way to not affect the noise impact.
The background noise level of the road or the surrounding country?
Just from the sensitive receptors, obviously road, the rail line, etc., and the existing business park are all factors that would be heard in the environment generally now. And so the job of the noise assessment is to consider the difference between that and with the scheme in place.
Okay, so you've come out and with a set of assumptions and looked at targets that you designed in terms of your project, yes?
Correct, and any detailed proposals would then be what we would then prove that they have then met those requirements.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Councillor Lord-Hans.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Walker, if I could just ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 980 vehicle movements, how many would you expect to head through Thatcham in a 24-hour period?
Well, just to put some context on that number to start with, that's an absolute worst case scenario of the whole development being a B8 use. If it's a B2 use, it's 482. So just to give some context to that figure, the likelihood is we're looking at somewhere in the middle of those two figures, but we don't know the end users, as I've said. In terms of the traffic assessment, it considers about half of those would go east, half would go west. However, the modelling is perhaps skewed by the fact that the assessment that was undertaken factored in the vehicles coming to and from the existing business park outside of the site, and so the true levels may be that more go east than west through Thatcham. But essentially, the assessment found it would be roughly split between the two.
And one further question, if I may, Chairman. We heard earlier from a speaker that they believe that the reason why you didn't want to reduce the height from 15 metres to 12 was because it would restrict the use of our friends, the robots. Is that correct? Well, I go back to what I said before. We believe 15 metres height is acceptable in visual terms. We're not seeking to put forward a development which we don't feel is acceptable. 15 metres height is acceptable in our view. We did provide evidence with the response on that height point that pointed to the fact that the average heights of these sorts of buildings are increasing. That's for a variety of reasons, one of those being automation. But I think the average height from memory is the internal height is now 14 metres for these new type of buildings. So obviously these buildings are lower than the average height, and obviously the developer wants to develop a scheme which is attractive to the market, and anything lower than that wouldn't be as attractive. But say, going back to the fundamental point is 15 metres to the ridge height is acceptable in visual terms in our view, in any case. And may I ask one final question, please? Can you just remind us how many people you expected to employ on this site?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the estimation is about 250 to 300 people, and they're high quality jobs. I think earlier on we had one of the councillors, the local councillors, implied that the jobs were low quality. Actually, the sort of GVA value of those jobs is actually higher than the national average. So I think there's a misconception there about the types of jobs. So 250 to 300, obviously depending on the end user, jobs will be created, and there's 150 jobs expected during the construction period as well.
Could I just expand on high quality? Could you explain what you mean by high quality jobs, please?
Well, I think increasingly jobs in industrial and warehouse types of developments are skilled. They require skills to operate machinery, etc. And there's also a large number of managerial positions as well. So we're not talking sort of unskilled labour here. We're talking.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any further questions, please?
Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Walker.
Thank you.
Move on now to local member, please, Councillor Pass.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try to concentrate on new points, but clearly there will be interaction on some of the points already raised. Again, thank you, those members who were able to attend this site visit and indeed take the trouble to drive down to Mrs. Underwood's farm to observe it from her land. I thought that was essential to do. I hope when you notice there, the surprise of being sandwiched between a railway line, largely now more and more electrified, and the busy A4 that we keep hearing. I hope you notice the peacefulness. I was quite surprised when I went down there to find out just how peaceful it was. Now, we obviously have to accept construction noise during any development like this, but we clearly will be looking at the longer term implications of a built development. 2 years ago, you will recall lockdown. We were locked down in Bucklebury, which is about a mile north of this site, up on the hill. You'd think miles away. The planning officer referred to 3 houses. There are 15 on Midgham Marsh, actually, just a little bit further on. If you go up Cox's Lane, there are another 5 houses, but I'm talking about a mile away. We heard this constant all summer, late at night, all right, it's a planning condition broken, and on Saturdays all day. I took it upon myself to drive down to find out what's going on. There was, on the existing Gable Way, pile driving. I had a very quiet word with the foreman. He did stop the piling at inappropriate times outside that existing planning condition. I'm just saying how far that noise travelled, only for a whole year. It didn't, not for very long. But the point I'm making is that building that was put up 2 years ago, I wish I'd taken you round Gable Way now. I wish I'd asked you to drive round there and look. There's a big sign on this new building that says, to let 44,000 square feet. If you ask Google, that is 4,087 square meters of this building built 2 years ago that is not let. Now, I, of course, do support, I'm going to say that better. I strongly support the economic growth of our district. I don't want us to be a commuter town. I want there to be high-tech industry. We've got high-tech industry in Gable Way. We have Extract, world-renowned. We have the Thatcham Research Establishment, which looks into the crashing and repairing of cars, the safety of cars. My concern, I confess, is, and I know that online shopping is growing exponentially and is set to grow. I think the report from memory says 35%. We do need, therefore, distribution. We do need B8 in old money type properties. It's where you put these big buildings. And my concern is the 24-hour-a-day operation. There's a strange beeping. May I continue? Yes, all right, okay. No alarms. My concern is that what I'm implying is there is a huge difference between high-tech Extract and Thatcham Research and 24-hour-a-day operations with distribution. We've got to have that distribution. In my opinion, it should be nearer to major intersections of transport. We ought to just prioritise what we're doing here. It should be, I'm sorry, Chairman, near a Thiel, because it's got greater access or easier access onto the M4, or potentially t'other side of Newbury with more access onto the A34 and M4 that way. So look, Chairman, this is access only, but we're being bombarded with, these are 15 metres high to allow automation, potentially for 24-hour operations. I'm not going to touch on flooding, that's been raised, but noise levels are important. Even on that bit between the A4 and the railway line, but noise carries. When the wind is wrong, we hear in Bucklebury, would you believe, the trains. We hear the building, the work that's going on in those buildings. So I'm sorry, it's a little disingenuous to say only 2 or 3 houses are here and 1 over there. This has a greater impact. I'm not saying there is no scope for this, for development in the Gable Way part of Colthrop, but I think this is a step too far. Chairman, with 10 seconds ago, I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Pask? Apparently escaped, Councillor Pask. Questions for officers? Councillor Linden.
Yes, bring on to, it's really for Brian Little, actually. Concerning the last point and just going wider than that on location from Councillor Pask, the ward member. But we do have a shortage of B8 and we know the implications, even though the government are changing their mind about demanding housing numbers. What are the wider implications of us not achieving sufficient B8? And could we say that location is an important consideration, Chairman? If Mr. Little could advise us on that.
Mr. Little?
The simple answer is, as a plan-led authority, we plan to meet our employment needs. We are 74% AONB. We have designated employment areas in the AONB. We have functional floodplain, and this is one of our designated employment areas. Without those designated employment areas, as Councillor Pass says, we could quite easily become a commuter district where people just live and everybody works in Reading, Swindon, Oxford, further afield London, just because they want to take advantage of our beautiful countryside.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bridgman.
Chairman, thank you. I'd just like to understand what has happened between the core strategy documents and policy 9, I think it's CS9, and now with the Economic Development Officer's reference to the Employment Land Review, because in CS9, and this is in the sort of references made in the pack at 6.9, there was an excess of B2, and it needed to be reduced, and there was roughly enough B8, and it needed to be maintained. Now we have that in the Employment Land Review, there is a shortfall of B1, B1C, B2 and B8 combined, so industrial, if you like, of 62,000 square meters. So I just want to understand what's happened to make that change, that we are now, and I'm not disagreeing with the Employment Land Review. There it is in black and colour. But one just wants to understand what's happening in the district, that we are now taking seeking to take agricultural land and turn it into industrial floor space.
I'm not sure.
Muted, Brian.
Probably just as well. Time has moved on. The employment land study was originally done in 2016. We did a refresh in 2020. Market conditions have changed. If we were to do another refresh yet again, I'm sure that we would come up with more changes because of what's happening globally, and we are, dare I say it, one of those changes is Brexit, and that the implications of that have been caught up in the 2020 Employment Land Review. So there are massive things going on globally, nationally, that are changing things. There are changes to our existing employment land supply, whereby regrettably we are having some offices converted into housing. Other sites are being used up. Some permissions are lapsing. There's a variety of stuff that's coming forward, including planning permissions being granted. So whereas we would love everybody to wait, hold fire, and go through the local plan process, as I said in the previous comment, we have two systems in operation. We have the local plan operation, which says you have to be evidence-based and allocate land accordingly. And at the same time, we have the development land process, which works on a totally different timescale. So if a developer wants to come through with a speculative application, that has to be considered. And if they are using our own evidence against us, say, well, yeah, you said there is a shortfall here, I'm willing to go for that shortfall now and use your existing policies. I'm willing to put my hand in my pocket and develop something because you have recognized there is a need. My own market analysis has recognized there is a need as well. And I want to strike while the iron is hot and get in there first.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Cotton.
Thank you, Chairman. two questions. One for the highways authorities, just to understand, because I didn't really get any clear answers from the applicant, what modelling has been done. We're looking, and we must take the worst case of 980 traffic movements. I presume that's in and out, which is about 40 an hour, which is, if we spread it throughout the day, which probably it won't, be a minute every 1.5 minutes, totaling in 6,860 movements per week. Has a serious modelling been done of this? Please explain.
Would you like me to? Yes, Mr. Chairman? Yes.
Yes, please. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Just to clarify, worst case scenario, there would be, according to the figures which have been developed based upon square meterage and the type of development that it could potentially be, 320 car movements arriving, 170 HGV movements arriving, 320 car movements departing, 170 HGV movements departing per 24 hours. So that's how it's been broken down. It works out a 4.36% increase on the traffic on the existing A4 traffic. It's been modelled that, and this is standard modelling based upon origin destination type modelling, where you see where, neighbouring developments where they split. You look at the similar sort of style of development which is proposed here, you see where that was likely to split. It looks like a 52% will go via Thatcher and 48% will go towards Thiel. So that is the split there. That is worst case. That is if all of it is the B8, all the units. And as the agent has said, and as we expect, it won't all be B8. There will be a slight mix, but worst case is all B8. 4.36% increase of traffic on the A4. When you're talking that the A4 has average daily flows of 22,500 vehicles, is minute in real terms. For comparison, 220 vehicles is 1% of the volume of traffic on the A4. So when you're talking 170 lorry movements arriving, 170 lorry movements departing, that's less than 1% additional lorry movements on the A4 per day, which is a very, very small percent. And we're also talking about the A4, which is a freight route, established freight route. It is a strategic motorway diversion route between Newbury and Thiel. It is a principal A road. So we're not even talking a B road, we're talking an A-class principal route. This is one of the highest classes of roads that we have got in West Berkshire. So when you put all that together with all the modelling which has been done in terms of where vehicles will be going to and from and the type of vehicles, we as the Highway Authority really do not have any justification for questioning or refusing this application.
A further follow-up question, if you don't mind, Chairman. So does this differentiate a trunk? So it's a trunk road, basically, is what you're saying. But this trunk road happens to go through the middle of Thatcham, a town, which is regulated by traffic lights, and you will be and is basically housing on it both sides. Probably this doesn't affect Highways opinions, but it might actually affect the people who live beside it. So you don't make any allowance for example, going to Thiel, and I know I'm going to get it from the member from Thiel here, which has a dual carriageway going past. You don't differentiate the quality of the trunk road going to Thiel to the trunk road going through a major town. There's no difference in your modelling for that. There's no allowances.
Can I first of all say, it's not a trunk road. You must be very careful not to call it a trunk road.
Okay, it was a trunk road.
It was a trunk road. It was detrunked. It is an A-class road. No, the modelling is based upon widths of the road, the type of road it is, the type of junctions, what serves onto it. Yeah, it will take into account the residential development, because obviously that affects the flows of traffic on and off it, that affects the speeds. It will take into account the fact that certain parts of the A4 through Newbury and Thatcham will be more urbanised. It will be subject to different regulations, different speed limits, different widths. But it is still, you've still got to consider it is a strategic national diversion route for the M4, and you must not forget that.
Thank you. I would like to point out, Councillor Cottam, that we have many properties in Thiel very, very close to the bypass.
Yes.
Some, which is
I do appreciate that, Chairman. My apologies were proffered early.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Question to highways, if I may. Additional mixed traffic expected to use the Northern Distributor Road then to avoid the A4 congestion. Floral Way, Tollway, okay. Heath Lane, Bowling Green Road. We know HGVs shake foundations of the houses on that route. And in parts, those roads are narrow and the footways are narrow. Additional traffic noise will come. What action will highways take to prevent HGVs using this route, which is not really suited to HGV traffic? Thank you.
If I might, as you know, the Thatcham Norman Distributor Road is not positively signed for HGVs. The A4 is signed as a designated freight route. Our actions would be not to positively sign it as an alternative route, because as we know, lorries will take every opportunity to use whatever route they can where they think that it's more appropriate. We also, from what I believe, we also have a very strong way of trying to persuade sat-nav companies to list appropriate roads, and that lorry sat-navs do not list roads such as Thatcham Norman Distributor Road as a suitable route. They will list only the freight routes, such as the A4. So as a highway authority, we will not be positively signing Thatcham Norman Distributor Road for vehicles, and we will just maintain the signage as it is at present, which, as local residents of Thatcham will know, it will point you into the general direction of where the local villages and everything are, but it doesn't actually specify from one end to the other that it is an alternative route to the A4.
So you didn't have your microphone on.
Absolutely. Could I expand on that question, please? The alternative then, Mr. Highways, surely would be to put a sign up saying no HGVs unless for access.
Chairman, what's this got to do with this application?
A great deal, Mr. Chairman.
You would assume that that would be the most easiest way to do it, but obviously access along Floral Way and those other roads around there still need to be maintained for some lorry movements, because obviously people will have deliveries and lorries will still need to deliver to those properties. What we are saying, that it will not be signed as a purposeful route for all lorry movements, that the A4 will remain as the main freight route for HGVs.
Thank you, Chairman.
You can obviously campaign on that point, Mr. Councillor Woodhouse. Councillor Mays.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Again, for Gareth Dowding. Gareth, it's been mentioned that the Cox's Lane traffic can't turn right towards Thatcham. I think that's we've both identified it from the design and the comments that have been made earlier. Can you tell me why, in fact, this estate, if it's built for development of the commercial type, can't come in through Gables Way? Through the existing development area, the warehousing area? Is there any reason why it can't come in from that route?
I suspect, not knowing the history behind why the access has been developed the way it is, it's because it's private land which is not available for them to construct an access through from the existing industrial estate. I suspect that's the point. Also, I'd like to point out that Cox's Lane does not appear to have a no right turn ban on it. It appears
design-wise,
not Cox's Lane. Cox's
well,
Lane.
the design you've got in the application, there's no right turn on it.
Well, on the plan that I have in front of me, Cox's Lane, as you're coming out, it has the giveaway line, it has the filter going to the left, but there doesn't appear to be any designated restriction there to stop you from turning right.
I think you go across the lane from the A4 going east.
Which is
that's dangerous in the extreme.
It's a right turn lane. It's the same as any right turn lane.
Okay.
Thank you. Got Councillor Pask and Councillor Cottam. I would like to point out what the time is. It's 9:45. Could we try and move things along a little bit, please?
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick with my question. It's a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, forgive me, Chairman, but Mr. Dowding did say that the A4, not trunk road, but the A4 is a strategic route, and it depends on width. Please, would he confirm that the proposed cycle lanes around the Hennick field does not reduce the width of the road to make it unsuitable?
All I can confirm is that the cycle lanes which have been constructed throughout Thatcham have been designed in accordance with current standards, and that the running lanes left on the A4 again are to current standards.
Thank you.
Councillor Cottam.
Yeah, very quick question. Can we actually designate whether we prefer B2 or B8 as part of this planning application?
The mix of B2 and B8 is not specified in the application, so you could put a condition on stipulating B2 and B8, but that condition, in terms of my advice to the committee, would be unreasonable because A, it's a speculative development, but also unless there are very good reasons for doing so, which clearly in officers' view there isn't, the justification for the splitting of the B2 and B8 just wouldn't be there, I'm afraid, and that condition would be sought to be relaxed. If refused, it would be appealed. I'm afraid to say we'd lose the appeal, so there'd be very little point in trying to impose that condition.
Thank you.
Sorry, could we move on to debate, please? Would someone like to open the debate? Councillor Law.
Sorry, I'm quite happy to open the debate now that my microphone's on. Unlike the last application where I was really not sure which way I was going to go until the end of this one, I'm quite clear cut in this one. Let me just back off a little bit, remind people, I was involved with the core strategy way back when from development in about 2008 through to 2012. And yes, we did in that core strategy put a note in saying, you know, we need to give Thatcham a bit of a rest. Yeah, well, that was 13, 14 years ago. To just remind people of the time scale. That core strategy also has something that's very relevant here. We actually identified some of the aspects, the benefits, the strengths of West Berkshire, and one of them was it's at the crossroads of England. It's sitting there on the east-west, the M4, the railway. It's north-south on the A34. From the likes of the docks at Southampton up until the Midlands. Ideal position for logistics and warehousing. I was a founder member of the LEP. And again, in the LEP, we looked at the whole thing and said, one of the real things about West Berkshire in particular is it's at the crossroads of England. It's ideal for warehousing and what have you. And fortunately, in many respects, the way the economies have gone, if you look at the likes of an Amazon and also Ocado and people like that, automated, computerized, robotic warehouses is about the one commercial property investment, if you put money in a couple of years ago, you'd have made money. Everywhere else was losing money, and it's still the way to go. So I would like the question. This is a question that the ward member asked. You know, if you don't put it here, where are we going to put it? That's the place to answer that is, of course, the local plan, and we know what the emerging local plan is saying about it. And yes, this is one of these locations, and Thatcham has been nominated as an employment, an area for employment and development. I don't question the sincerity and the concerns of the local parishes, the councillors, the local the district councillors as well. And I understand where they can be coming from, objecting to this and fearing this. However, we're, as a committee, as a member of this committee, we really have to make our decisions based and guided by policy. And this is where it's different from the last one. We have here a policy, an existing policy in the local plan, policy CS9, which actually lends support to this application. We didn't have that last time in the previous application, so it is here now. We also have, it's a type of industrial development that's fully endorsed by the council's own very, very recently approved economic development plan. So again, another policy that supports this application. And of course, it's fully, as you can see in the paper, it's a pity we didn't have actually the economic development officer here tonight, but it's very, very clear from the paper. The economic development officer is extremely supportive of this, and all the studies say we do need more of this type of employment. And you know, I was glad the agent talked about high added value jobs. If you go to some of these warehouses, and I've actually visited some over the last few years, the type of people, though, you know, robotics need very skilled people to maintain them and to program them. So he's absolutely right. It's not low. It's not unskilled laboring, moving boxes around. There's a lot of skill. It is high tech in many ways. So it's absolutely right. So I'm looking at this and saying, again, if you don't put it here, where? I said that's the job of the local plan. So I'm very supportive of this tonight.
Councillor Cotter?
Chairman, sorry, can I interrupt? We are, it's 10 minutes to 10. Can we?
Chairman, can I move a non-notice motion to extend the meeting beyond 10 o'clock should you deem that you think that we can deliver the business in that timescale before 10:30?
I'll second that.
Those in favour, please. Yes.
That for the moment it's this one. I think then when we get to the point of concluding this one, whether it's before 10 or after 10, I leave it to the chairman to decide.
I concur.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cotter.
Thank you. Well, we're talking about insights and experience, and I've been in with an engineering background. I've been in manufacturing industry, warehousing industry for over 3 decades. I've actually been in warehouses. I've actually been in automated warehouses. I know how they work. I wonder how many people here have actually been there and know what they need to do and how they operate. Well, actually, I do. A non, shall we say, skilled view is, because I'm not a highways officer, is that no, Thatcham is not an ideal base for logistics. It has no road north. It has no road south. It has basically a large road going through the middle of an inhabited area. Already I've had complaints about lorries, and we're not talking about cars. We're not even talking about, like an estate of maybe 2,500 houses, for example, where they could be small vehicles and they could be electric vehicles. And we've got to take the worst case, because if they go and see, and as what has been said, it's the most profitable area, there's going to be no basically light industry. It's going to be all automated. If you think that you're going to get any jobs out of an automated robotic warehousing system, you really are not aware of the reality, because basically the systems, you have basically minders, and you might actually get maybe 1 or 2 or perhaps even 3, if you're lucky, people operating the systems. There are no highly skilled jobs. If there's a problem, the company who installed the robotic systems comes in and fixes it at short notice. I've actually known a company in Thatcham again who did agency drivers. It closed because it couldn't get enough drivers. As already has been stated, West Berkshire Council itself doesn't have enough drivers, and we're saying we need more drivers. I asked an earlier question about B2 and B8, because actually Thatcham has been losing all of its B2 turneries, and now recently the station estate. And I know, as a local businessman who knows other local businessmen, like the spectacle manufacturers, like a lot of the other small companies around the area, that there is a demand for light industry. 80% of the employment of this country is light industry, small businesses, SMEs. So I'm really sad to hear that we can't actually, because I was thinking, okay, I accept we have an economic plan, and yes, we must create jobs, but you are creating no jobs in a warehouse, automated, robotic, as has been proved by the applicant himself, warehouse. It's not going to give you any jobs. So I'm sorry, I know that from experience, and maybe I will challenge our officers or economic planning, because I do know about these things, and I've seen them for many, many years. So, and then we go on to say, oh, well, okay, I understand it from a highways point of view, mathematically speaking, yes, it's only 1%. But the fact that you've got, as I said, a potential of nearly 7,000 movements, and let's say that because they want to maximize it, and it will be 24/7. If it's not 24/7, actually, it'll be 80 movements per hour during the days, because you've taken out 12 hours of that. And, there's such a thing as councillors' background and knowledge that I came on this council to give. And this is it, really. I understand we have policies, and I have to defer to basically the highways, because it is 1%. And when you get an inspector, they really blindly just look at that 1%, not the fact that it's 3,400 lorries going through the middle of Thatcham. That really isn't important to them, obviously. I despair at this system where we are blindly jumping to the tune of basically simplistic views of the economy. I actually did study economics, and it's so simplistic. I mean, it's just not real. What we're trying to bring in here is actually reality of what this is actually going to do for our local community. And basically, I cannot support this. I am also really surprised by environmental health not coming back. I actually asked them a question. I haven't had an answer on what the air quality in Thatcham is, because I thought that being maybe 7,000, no, sorry, 3,500. Actually, it's 4,000, because the rest will be going to Thiel. That might actually have an effect on the air quality and the noise and the vibration. Have you ever been in Old Bluegate School chapel or school? You can actually feel the lorries going by. We have had complaints from neighbours on that. Let's smell the coffee, wake up and smell the coffee. This isn't just about mathematics and modelling. This is about what actually is going to actually really happen to the local community. And that's why, again, I know the officers said, oh, we'll go to appeal. So really now I'm stuck, because I was going to say, okay, let's go for B2. Actually, create some real jobs for the local people, because none of the jobs will be created locally except those 3 people who maybe be there. I can assure you and guarantee you that. So, well, there we are. So I'm actually between a rock and a hard place, because I'm telling, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. We're just looking at the mathematics of it and not looking at the reality. You get the drift slightly, the point that I'm trying to raise here. Just to say, in case you really aren't, I'm not being clear, I actually now have to say, well, I'll actually be voting against this, because it leaves me no option. There are no choices, it seems, that we can actually go down. And the facts, the reality just actually doesn't matter. Thank you, Chairman. Sorry for going on rather longer than anybody really should.
Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. I do share some of the concerns with what's going on, but I've listened to this debate with quite a lot of care, and I sympathise with Councillor Law here. And I've obviously listened to the parish, our 2 district councillors who serve on the parish council, the town council, sorry, and Miss Underwood. But the fact is, I think the officers have made their case. I think we'd lose on appeal, and we do need to sort out distribution. It is a suitable site for it. I know there are problems in Thatcham, and it is going to cause a problem in Thatcham, and I don't deny it, and places like Wolverhampton when they go the other way. I don't disagree with that, but I don't think we've got a solid case to stop this application. And I'm sorry to say that I'm going to propose officers' recommendations.
I think Councillor Somner wanted to speak, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I listened to what Councillor Cotton said, and I understand his impassioned plea for the position and for rejecting it. I think my comments would be noting a previous comment that there's a vacant unit round there. Well, what if the same potential organisation, and it is a potential organisation because we don't have a defined organisation going into that unit, were it to be approved, were to use and occupy the vacant one, then that traffic would be coming through anyway. That potential would still be there anyway. It wouldn't actually change anything. It would just be a different unit. If they were to take up one of the other vacant units across the district, what route would they be taking? What control would we have over it? None. I think Mr. Dowding's point about the A4 and the designation of the A4 and the use of the A4 is crucial to that side of the conversation. I do understand where the residents and the local conversation is going. I don't have the grace of living in the middle of the countryside. I live in Calcutta, Chairman, as you know, and I can never not hear the motorway or the railway or neighbours. So I can't put myself in that position and say it would be worse, because it just is for me. That doesn't mean this is right, and it doesn't mean it's wrong. But I think for me, the application is about potential. The application is supported by our policy, and we have a clear statement from our economic development officers that make a clear statement. And I'm sorry that members might, for the point of making their point, go against what's been stated. The fact of the matter is, these are people that are employed by the authority for a specific role, and that role has been provided with an evidenced background to say that we do need business in this district, and we know that business rates are a crucial part of the funding for any area, whether we keep it all or not. To not have employment in the area will kill the area off, I'm sure, in many ways. I'm happy to second Councillor Linden's proposal if you want him to make it in that order, Chairman.
So I'll go back to Councillor Linden. Would you like to make your proposal?
Yes, I'd like to propose officers' recommendation for approval.
Does that find a second?
Happy to second, Chairman.
We have a proposal for officers' recommendation to approve the application. Will everybody in favour please show their hands? And those against, please?
Chairman, I'm abstaining. I feel I can't vote for this for local reasons, but I understand the arguments.
So the proposal is carried, therefore approval is delegated to the director. Okay.
All right, I'll resume the chair. I mean, members, we do have one other item on this agenda. In view of the time and for explanation for those who have waited patiently for 3.5 hours, I fear we will not conduct a proper examination of the last item. I'm looking at officers just to say I'm on the right track here, because I am proposing from the chair, unless I hear violent objection from officers, that with sincere apologies to those present on the last application, that we give it our full consideration at the next meeting, which is due to be on the 1st of June. I think I'm going to make that a proposed. Do I have to vote on this? I'm seeking legal advice.
I'll second that, Chairman.
Well, may I see those in favour, please, of deferring the last item to the next meeting? Please show.
Chairman, may I just say,
Bridgman,
I'm
yes.
in favour of deferring the next item, but I would ask you as chairman of the committee to discuss with officers, because I'm somewhat aware of the matters that may be coming forward at the next scheduled meeting of this committee. So I would ask you to consider whether an additional meeting of this committee is necessary in order to dispose of business. But I leave that as chairman to discuss with officers.
Well, I will indeed discuss that. I too am aware of, we have many applications coming. This is why I'm always reluctant to cancel meetings as we did the last one, because it has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? But if something isn't ready, we can't bring nothing. So I will discuss that with Mr. Dre and others. And if we do need to schedule one, I would ask that we can try to accommodate such a
I
request.
concur with that, Chairman.
So, members, and again, my humblest apologies to those waiting at St Andrew's School and Heron's Farm, and we will give it full consideration next time, I promise. Members, as the next meeting is the 1st of June, we historically do site visits on the 25th of May, that's the Wednesday before. We tried evening meetings last time because we have a few weeks or months of daylight. May I propose that we start at 6:30, potentially, if we have a lot, which I'm not sure of, potentially even 6 o'clock. Does that find favour?
Which date is that?
The 25th of May, the Wednesday before the next meeting.
Yeah.
Right, well, members, may I thank the Vice Chairman for chairing both items. You did very well, and thank you very much. And I declare the meeting closed.